I am Chloe Lopez. I am 28 years old. I stood in my custom lace gown, the crisp Idaho breeze coming off Lake Coeur d'Alene, lifting the heavy edge of my veil. Through the wrought iron gates of the estate, I watched two off-duty police officers escort my mother toward the gravel parking lot. Her heels slipped in the dry dirt. She pointed a trembling finger at me, shouting words the wind snatched away before they could reach the flagstone patio. I did not need to hear them to know the script. She was calling me a devil. She was calling me a traitor. What she did not realize was she was the one who had taught me how to fight. You learn a lot about survival when the person supposed to protect you views you as competition. And the woman standing next to me in the courtyard, quietly holding a manila folder packed with forged bank receipts, that was my cousin Brittany, the bride my mother had originally stolen this exact venue for. To understand how a mother ends up escorted off a mountain by armed security on her own daughter's wedding day, we have to rewind 6 months. But before I take you back, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Savage Revenge Stories, but only if this story truly speaks to you. And I would love to know how old you are and where you are listening from right now. Drop it in the comments. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning in Boise. I was sitting on my back porch, nursing a lukewarm mug of black coffee. The scent of pine needles and damp soil hung in the early morning air. Inside the house, my fiancé Nolan was tying his tie for work. Nolan is a financial analyst. He is a man who speaks in spreadsheets, structural integrity, and quiet, steady promises. We had spent 2 years saving $25,000 for our wedding. We skipped vacations, we ate boxed pasta. We tracked every single expense on a shared digital ledger just to afford the $5,000 deposit on the Coeur d'Alene estate. My phone vibrated against the cedar table. The caller ID glowed bright against the wood. Summit Hospitality Event Coordination. I answered, expecting a routine question about linen colors or catering headcount. Instead, I heard the hesitant, nervous breathing of Sarah, our venue manager. Ms. Lopez, Sarah started, her voice thin and unnaturally high. I am calling to finalize the ledger transfer. We have successfully moved your booking and the primary deposit over to Brittany's name, per Patricia's instructions. The heat drained from my hands. My fingers went numb against the ceramic mug. Transfer. Sarah, I did not authorize a transfer. Your mother called yesterday, Sarah replied, the corporate polish in her tone slipping into defensive panic. She paid a premium upgrade fee to retain the exact date, but swapped the primary bride. She said you and Nolan were postponing due to finances. Since her credit card was the one we kept on file for emergency incidentals, our system allowed her to authorize the portfolio shift. I did not scream. I did not cry. A strange, glacial calm washed over me. The kind of calm that hits right before a car crash, when your brain realizes the brakes are gone. My mother, Patricia, had always harbored a quiet, toxic preference for my cousin. Brittany was the pageant winner, the cheerleader, the girl who wore pastel pinks and smiled on command. I was the graphic designer who wore black denim and asked too many questions. Growing up, if Brittany wanted my bicycle, my mother told me to share. If Brittany wanted my bedroom during summer visits, my mother told me to sleep on the couch. But this was not a bicycle. This was my wedding, my date, my money. Sarah, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level, you altered a legal contract based on a phone call from an emergency contact. Reverse it. I cannot do that, Sarah snapped, her patience evaporating into cold institutional policy. The premium is locked. The new contract is signed. If you have a family dispute, you need to take it up with Patricia. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The Idaho pines swayed in the distance, indifferent to the fact that my future had just been hijacked. Patricia had not just taken a venue. She was methodically erasing my milestone to guarantee her favorite niece stayed in the spotlight. She took our money. She took our date. She left us with zero leverage and an empty bank account. The sliding glass door scraped open. Nolan stepped onto the porch, catching the look on my face. He did not ask if I was okay. He looked at the blank screen of my phone, then at my white knuckles gripping the coffee mug. Before I could form the words to tell him we had just lost everything we worked for, my screen lit up again. It was a notification from Facebook. Patricia had just tagged me in a public post. I opened the app, and the trap she had laid for me snapped shut. Before I could even process the fact that my life savings and my dream venue had just been stolen by my own mother, my phone started vibrating against the cedar table again. Not a single buzz, a relentless, continuous swarm of notifications. I unlocked the screen expecting to see Nolan's text asking what had happened, or maybe a follow-up from the venue. Instead, my screen was filled with messages from people I had not spoken to in months. Aunt Carol, Uncle David, my cousin Maria. Every single notification was a variation of the same theme. Aunt Carol wrote, "Chloe, honey, what you did for Brittany is the most beautiful, selfless thing I have ever seen. You are an absolute angel. God will bless your marriage for this sacrifice." Uncle David sent, "Proud of you, kiddo. Letting Brittany have the Coeur d'Alene date so her boy can deploy with peace of mind. That is true family loyalty." I stared at the messages, the words blurring together. Sacrifice? Angel? Family loyalty? I had not sacrificed anything. I had been robbed. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I clicked on the notification that had started it all. The Facebook tag from Patricia. There it was, a perfectly curated, tearful masterpiece of a post. Patricia had uploaded a grainy, faded photograph of Brittany and me from when we were 7 years old. We were wearing matching Easter dresses, standing on my grandmother's front porch. I was looking at the camera, but Brittany was looking at the plastic tiara on my head, her hand reaching out to pull it off. Even back then, the dynamic was set. Above the photo, Patricia had written, "A novel." My heart is just bursting with pride today. As many of you know, my sweet niece Brittany's fiancé is being deployed overseas sooner than expected. The stress of planning a rushed military wedding has been taking a toll on all of us. But today, my incredible daughter Chloe did the most selfless thing a bride could do. Chloe and Nolan have graciously decided to step aside, postponing their own celebration and gifting their beautiful Coeur d'Alene venue reservation to Brittany so she can have her dream day before he ships out. Chloe, you are a sacrificial angel. If she seems a little stressed or snappy lately, please give her grace. Wedding stress is real, and she is giving up so much for family. We are so blessed. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, the words carving themselves into my brain. My mother had masterfully inverted reality before I even had the chance to defend myself. She had not just stolen the venue, she had stolen the narrative. She launched a preemptive strike, painting herself as the grateful matriarch and me as the willing martyr. And the most brilliant, insidious part of her trap? That last line. If she seems a little stressed or snappy lately, please give her grace. She had built a psychological cage. If I commented on that post and screamed the truth, if I told my aunts and uncles that Patricia had forged an authorization to drain my bank account and steal my date, I would look like an unhinged, jealous bride throwing a tantrum. They would read her post, look at my anger, and think, "Oh, poor Chloe. The wedding stress is making her crazy. She regrets her generous gift." I was suffocating under the weight of it. Idaho is not a place where secrets stay quiet. Boise feels like a big city until family gossip gets involved, and then it shrinks down to the size of a high school cafeteria. My mother knew exactly how to weaponize the Lopez family network. She knew that if she got her story out first, the truth would forever look like sour grapes. Nolan walked back onto the porch. He was fully dressed for work now, his tie perfectly straight. He saw the way I was holding the phone like it was something radioactive. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. I handed him the phone. I could not speak. The lump in my throat was too thick. A jagged mixture of betrayal and utter disbelief. Nolan took the phone. I watched his eyes scan the screen, reading my mother's post, then scrolling through the comments. Aunt Carol praising my generosity, Maria calling me a saint. Nolan is not a man who yells. In the 3 years we have been together, I have never seen him raise his voice. He does not slam doors or throw things, but when he gets truly angry, he goes completely, terrifyingly still. He read the last comment, locked the screen, and set the phone down on the cedar table. He did not hand it back to me. He placed it there with a precise, deliberate motion. He looked out at the pine trees, his jaw setting into a hard line. He looked like a structural engineer inspecting a building he had just realized was fundamentally unsound. A building he was now calculating exactly how to demolish. "We can sue them," he said quietly. "We can call the venue's corporate office, report the fraudulent charge, and have Patricia arrested for wire fraud." He was right. We could. But I knew my family. I knew the fallout. "If we sue my mother," I whispered, finally finding my voice, "we destroy the family. She will play the victim. She will say we are trying to ruin a military wedding over a scheduling misunderstanding. My grandmother will take her side. The aunts will take her side. We will get the money back, but we will walk down the aisle alone." Nolan turned to look at me, his eyes steady. "Do you care if they are there, Chloe? After this?" I did. That was the tragic, pathetic truth. Despite everything, I wanted my grandmother there. I wanted my father's brothers there. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good daughter, the easy child, the one who did not cause problems, just to earn a fraction of the affection Patricia freely poured over Brittany. "I cannot let her win the narrative," I said, standing up. The wood of the porch creaked under my bare feet. "If I attack Patricia, she wins. But Brittany knows. Brittany has to know what happened. I am going to talk to her. If I can get Brittany to admit she knew the venue was stolen, I can force Patricia to back down without tearing the whole family apart." Nolan watched me, his expression unreadable. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His hand was warm, grounding me in the crisp morning air. "Call her," he said. "But Chloe, do not expect a thief to apologize for the robbery." I thought he was being cynical. I thought, despite the favoritism and the lifelong comparisons, Brittany was still my cousin. We had played in the sprinklers together. We had shared secrets in the dark. Surely, when confronted with the reality that my wedding had been destroyed for hers, she would show some remorse. She would tell Patricia she could not accept the stolen date. I was wrong. Nolan was right. But the confirmation of his warning did not come through a phone call. It did not come through a text message or a tearful confession. It arrived 3 days later, sitting innocently in my mailbox, wrapped in thick, custom-pressed paper. A physical manifestation of my stolen life, delivered right to my front door. Nolan was right about the apology. It never came. Instead, the postman delivered the ultimate insult 3 days later. I was standing at the kitchen island sorting through the mail. Bills, junk flyers, a thick, textured envelope with my name handwritten in calligraphy. I recognized the paper instantly. It was a heavyweight, 130-pound cotton stock with a subtle deckled edge. I knew it because I had spent a week sourcing it from a boutique paper mill in Portland. I had paid for the sample pack myself. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out the card. The breath rushed out of my lungs in a sharp, painful exhale. It was a save the date. But it was not just any save the date. It was mine. Printed on that heavy cotton stock was the exact botanical motif I had painstakingly created over 60 hours. It was a complex, interlocking design of native Idaho wildflowers. syringa, fireweed, Indian paintbrush. The line work was delicate, colored in muted sage and blush, framing the center text. The text that now read, Brittany and Kevin. Below their names, it listed the date, my date, and the location, the Coeur d'Alene estate. I traced the edge of the printed syringa blossom with my fingertip. It was a flawless vector reproduction. This was not a screenshot or a cheap copy. They had the original design file. My mother did not know the first thing about graphic design or file formats. She could barely attach a photo to an email. There was only one way they could have acquired this. I walked over to my laptop on the dining table, flipped it open, and logged into my wedding planning cloud account. It was a shared drive where I kept vendor contracts, inspiration boards, and all my design assets. I clicked on the activity log. There it was, 2 days ago. A login from a device in Meridian, Idaho, Brittany's town. Brittany had not just accepted a stolen venue. She had actively logged into my private account, navigated to the design folder, and downloaded my intellectual property. She took the invitations. She took the menu templates. She even downloaded the massive digital files I had created for the custom LED backdrops that the Coeur d'Alene venue featured in their main reception hall. The audacity was staggering. It felt like walking into my own house and finding a stranger wearing my clothes, sleeping in my bed, completely unbothered by the intrusion. Patricia had stolen the space, but Brittany was trying to steal my very identity. She wanted the exact aesthetic, the exact vibe, the exact wedding I had built, just with her name pasted over mine. I sat there, staring at the activity log. My hands were shaking, but this time it was not from shock. It was from a cold, crystalline fury. In that moment, the paralyzed, grieving version of Chloe Lopez evaporated. The girl who always kept the peace, who always shared her toys, who always let Brittany shine, vanished. You do not steal a digital architect's blueprints and expect the house to stand. I am a graphic designer. My entire career is built on understanding digital architecture, layers, and hidden code. I knew exactly how those large format reception hall files worked. The venue required specific dimensions, layered vectors, and specific file types to project onto their expensive screens. I could have changed my password. I could have locked them out of the drive. I could have sent a cease and desist letter demanding they stop using my designs. But I did none of those things. I left the door wide open. Instead, I opened the master design files on my hard drive. I loaded the massive backdrop file they had already downloaded, the one intended to be displayed behind the head table during the reception. It was a beautiful, static image of the wildflower motif. I did not delete it. I updated it. I added a new layer deep within the file, a dormant visual sequence. It was a technique we sometimes used for interactive art installations, a hidden watermark, a digital Trojan horse, coded to remain invisible unless activated by a specific, high-contrast color shift that only a certain lighting cue could trigger. I designed the hidden layer meticulously. It was not a floral pattern. It was text. Sharp, high-resolution, undeniable text. I embedded the screenshots of the fraudulent bank transfer. I embedded the email Sarah sent confirming my mother's unauthorized change. I embedded the transcript of the voicemails my mother had left me. I packed all the evidence of their theft into a single, sleeping layer of code within the beautiful, stolen backdrop. When I was finished, I exported the updated file and quietly replaced the original one in the cloud drive. Then, I waited. I watched the activity log. 8 hours later, another download request registered from Meridian. They pulled the updated file. They thought they were just getting a higher resolution version for the venue's projector system. They had no idea they had just downloaded the weapon of their own destruction. I closed my laptop. The shaking had stopped. My pulse was steady. I had turned my stolen intellectual property into a ticking time bomb. Let them print the invitations. Let them plan the menu. Let them stand in front of that beautiful backdrop. When the time was right, that design would detonate. But a hidden digital trap would not pay the bills. The Coeur d'Alene estate still held my money. The $5,000 deposit that Nolan and I had sacrificed for was still trapped in their accounting system, absorbed into Brittany's stolen contract. We needed that money back to rebuild, to elope, to do anything. I could not fight a war with an empty bank account. The next morning, I drove to the corporate office of Summit Hospitality, the parent company that managed the estate. I was done dealing with Sarah over the phone. I wanted to look someone in the eye and demand my life savings back. I parked outside the sleek, glass-fronted building downtown. I was armed with my original contract, my bank statements, and the undeniable proof that Patricia had forged the authorization. I was ready to tear down whatever corporate bureaucracies stood in my way. I walked up to the reception desk, requested a meeting with regional accounting, and sat in the waiting area, my binder of evidence resting on my knees. I was prepared for a fight. But I was not prepared for the massive, impenetrable institutional brick wall I was about to hit. The glowing screen of my phone illuminated the dark kitchen, casting a harsh blue light across the granite countertops. I stared at the banking application. My eyes locked on the blinking cursor, pulsing next to our savings balance. The number staring back at me was a hollow shell. $5,000 was missing. Weddings are a precarious financial house of cards. You stack one expense on top of another, holding your breath, hoping a sudden gust of wind does not bring the entire structure crashing down. For Nolan and me, that $5,000 venue deposit was our cornerstone. It was the foundation holding our entire future celebration together. We did not have generational wealth to fall back on. That balance represented 2 years of rigid, unyielding discipline. It meant skipping our anniversary trip to the Oregon coast. It meant Nolan brewing his own coffee every single morning and taking on extra client portfolios. It meant me accepting tedious freelance logo design projects, working late into the night until my eyes blurred. That money was our sweat, our sacrifice, digitized into a checking account. Now, it was gone. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. The drive to the Summit Hospitality corporate office in downtown Boise was a blur of gray asphalt and red traffic lights. I needed to speak to someone in person. I needed to bypass the automated phone trees and the cowardly email deflections. I parked my car, the tires scraping the concrete curb, and marched through the revolving glass doors of the high-rise building. The lobby was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. Polished marble floors reflected the recessed lighting. Sleek leather couches sat empty, and the faint scent of synthetic lavender hung in the sterile air. I approached the reception desk and demanded to see Sarah, the regional manager who had authorized the theft of my venue. The receptionist tried to stall, offering a polite deflection about scheduling an appointment, but I did not blink. I stood my ground, clutching a thick binder containing my original agreements, my bank statements, and the undeniable proof of my primary ownership. Eventually, Sarah emerged from a frosted glass corridor. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and a tight, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She guided me into a small, windowless conference room. I did not bother sitting down. I slid my bank statements across the dark mahogany table. "I want the refund processed today," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm. "You transferred a legal reservation without the primary account holder granting permission. That is theft." Sarah did not reach for the papers. She folded her hands primly in front of her waist. "Ms. Lopez, we discussed the parameters of this situation on the phone. The venue agreement allows the primary financial sponsor to amend the reservation parameters." I pointed a sharp finger at the signature line on the document resting between us. "My name is on that line. My mother only provided her credit card for day-of-event incidentals. It was a backup method, not a deed of ownership. Sarah tilted her head, her corporate armor flawless and impenetrable. When Patricia called our office, she did not merely request a name change. She upgraded the entire event package. She paid a $10,000 premium fee to lock the specific date for Brittany. According to Section 4, Paragraph B of our regional policy, the party holding the primary financial ledger for an upgraded event assumes immediate control of the booking. Your initial deposit was absorbed into the new invoice. Absorbed. The word hung in the air, cold and unforgiving. Sarah was telling me that my mother had essentially bought my contract out from under me. Patricia had used a contractual loophole designed to protect the venue profit margins, exploiting the fine print to hijack my reservation. I looked into Sarah's unblinking eyes and realized she did not care about family dynamics. She did not care about ethics, morality, or stolen dreams. She cared about a $10,000 upsell, and she had the legal jargon to build an impenetrable barricade around that profit. If you wish to contest the ledger transfer, Sarah said, taking a step backward toward the frosted glass door to signal the end of our meeting, our legal department handles all arbitration. I suggest you review the arbitration clause with an attorney. I walked out of that building feeling like someone had hollowed out my chest with a carving knife. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Staring out at the bustling Boise traffic, the true brilliance of my mother's cruelty finally washed over me. Patricia did not just steal the Coeur d'Alene estate because it was beautiful. She stole it to bankrupt my contingency plan. If she had simply canceled my reservation and let the venue refund my $5,000, Nolan and I could have pivoted. We could have taken our recovered capital and booked a rustic barn in Nampa. We could have rented a lakeside pavilion in McCall. We could have salvaged our date, sent out new invitations, and moved forward. But by trapping our cornerstone deposit inside Brittany's upgraded package, my mother effectively chained us to the floor. We had no capital left to start over. Our wedding fund was depleted. She executed a calculated financial strike to ensure we could not just pivot to a new location. We were boxed in. She wanted to force me to surrender. She wanted me to call her broken and compliant, begging for a loan or accepting whatever scraps she deemed appropriate to hand out. Sadness is a heavy emotion. It weighs you down, makes you sluggish, makes you want to curl into a dark corner and disappear. Anger is entirely different. Anger is jet fuel. The sorrow evaporated from my veins, replaced by a searing, white-hot focus. I shoved the key into the ignition. I did not drive back to my quiet neighborhood. I pointed my car west, toward Meridian, toward the sprawling, manicured subdivision where my mother lived. The radio remained off. The only sound in the cabin was the hum of the engine and the rapid rhythm of my own breathing. I was tired of being the silent victim. I was tired of playing digital chess while she burned the board to the ground. Every mile marker I passed fueled my resolve. I recalled the decades of subtle digs, Patricia critiquing my career choice, claiming graphic design was not a real profession. Patricia praising Brittany's mediocre accomplishments while ignoring my promotions. Patricia telling me I was too rigid, too demanding, too difficult to love. All those memories coalesced into a single, unbreakable objective. I was going to stand in her immaculate kitchen, look her straight in the eye, and demand the return of my funds. I was ready for a screaming match. I was ready to tear down the polite facade we had maintained for nearly 3 decades. Let the neighbors hear. Let the family gossip. I did not care anymore. I pulled into her wide driveway. Her silver sedan sat in the garage, pristine and polished. I slammed my car door. The afternoon sun beat down on the hot pavement as I marched up the concrete walkway. I did not bother to ring the doorbell. I grabbed the heavy brass handle, pushed the mahogany door open, and stepped onto the hardwood floor of the foyer. I had my opening line loaded. I had my righteous fury primed. I rounded the corner into the kitchen, my lungs expanding to unleash years of suppressed rage. But the scream died in my throat before it could even begin. Patricia was waiting for me. And the devastating sentence she delivered next stripped away every weapon I had brought to the fight, trapping me in a corner I never saw coming. I slammed the heavy mahogany door open, the brass handle hitting the drywall with a sharp, satisfying crack. My mother's house in suburban Meridian was a monument to curated perfection. The entryway smelled of expensive vanilla diffusers. The hardwood floors were spotless. Every throw pillow on the cream-colored sofa was precisely chopped down the middle. It was a house designed to project an image of effortless, upper-middle-class grace, a stage set where Patricia played the role of the devoted matriarch. I marched past the pristine living room and into the kitchen. The afternoon light poured through the bay windows, illuminating the granite island where Patricia stood. She did not flinch when the door slammed. She did not drop the linen napkin she was folding. She just looked up, her expression a masterclass in practiced serenity. She wore a crisp white blouse and pearl earrings, looking like she was preparing for a country club luncheon rather than a confrontation with her estranged daughter. "Give it back," I demanded, my voice echoing off the subway tile backsplash. "Call Sarah at Summit Hospitality. Unwind the transfer. Give me my deposit and my date back. Now." Patricia smoothed the crease of the napkin with her thumb, applying just enough pressure to create a flawless edge. She sighed. It was a heavy, theatrical sigh, heavy with the burden of dealing with an unreasonable child. "Chloe, please do not raise your voice in my home," she murmured, picking up another napkin from the stack. "You are making a scene over logistics." "Logistics?" I stepped closer to the island, placing my hands flat on the cold granite. "You stole my wedding. You forged my authorization to drain my $5,000 deposit and handed my dream to Brittany. You posted a public lie on Facebook claiming I volunteered for this. You are a thief." Patricia stopped folding. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a profound, condescending disappointment. It was the same look she gave me when I chose a state university over her preferred private college. The same look she gave me when I told her I wanted to be a graphic designer instead of a lawyer. "You are being incredibly selfish, Chloe," she said softly. Her voice lacked any defensive edge. It was smooth, impenetrable, and chillingly calm. "I thought you would understand. I truly did. But I see I overestimated your maturity." "Maturity?" My pulse thudded in my ears. "I am 28 years old. Mom, I saved for 2 years for that venue. You stole my life savings." Patricia set the napkin down. She placed her palms flat on the counter, mirroring my stance, but her energy was entirely different. She was a predator waiting for the prey to exhaust itself. "It is not about you, Chloe," she whispered, leaning in slightly. "It is about Grandma." I froze. The word hung in the air, sudden and sharp. "Grandma?" Patricia nodded, her eyes welling up with tears on command. The speed at which she could summon moisture to her eyes was terrifying. "I did not want to tell you this way. I wanted to wait until the family gathered on Sunday. But since you are determined to throw a tantrum over a venue deposit, I suppose you force my hand." My chest tightened. Grandma Lopez, my father's mother, was the only person in this family who ever made me feel seen. She taught me how to bake. She bought me my first sketch pad. She was my anchor. "What about Grandma?" I asked, the fire in my veins suddenly replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Patricia wiped a stray tear from her cheek with the tip of her index finger. "Her heart condition is worsening. The doctors told us last week. The medication is no longer effective. They do not think she will make it to next year." The air left my lungs. The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. "Brittany's fiancé is deploying in 4 months," Patricia continued, her voice trembling with perfect modulated grief. Brittany went to Grandma crying because Kevin might not come back and Grandma might not be here when he does. Grandma broke down, Chloe. She said her only wish was to see Brittany married before she passed. I stared at the pristine granite countertop, my vision blurred. Grandma was dying. I had to act, Patricia said, regaining her composure, adopting the tone of a burdened leader making tough choices for the greater good. The Coeur d'Alene venue was the only place large enough to accommodate the family on such short notice. I knew you and Nolan had a long engagement planned. I knew you were struggling to save the rest of the funds. I made an executive decision to upgrade the package and secure the date for Brittany so Grandma could have her dying wish. She reached across the island and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cold. I know you are hurt, Chloe, but would you really deny your dying grandmother the chance to see her favorite granddaughter married? Would you really be that cruel? I pulled my hand away as if she had burned me. She had checkmated me. The psychological trap was complete. If I fought back now, I was not just a bitter bride fighting over a deposit. I was a monster attacking a grieving family. I was the selfish daughter trying to ruin a dying woman's last joy. If I went to the police, if I sued Summit Hospitality, Patricia would parade Grandma's failing heart in front of a judge. She would tell the entire Lopez family that I prioritized $5,000 over my grandmother's dying wish. I would be permanently, irrevocably exiled. Patricia picked up the linen napkin and resumed folding. She had won. She had deployed the ultimate emotional nuclear weapon, and the blast radius had leveled my entire defense. I backed away from the island. The anger that had fueled my drive from downtown Boise was gone, replaced by a hollow, crushing defeat. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway, and out the front door. I did not look back. I sat in my car in her driveway for a long time. The Idaho sun baked the interior, but I felt freezing cold. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo of Grandma and me from last Christmas. She looked so vibrant, her eyes bright behind her wire-rimmed glasses, holding a plate of gingerbread cookies. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to drive back to Nolan, tell him the wedding was off, and suggest we elope at the courthouse. I could not fight terminal illness. I could not fight a woman willing to weaponize death to get her way. I started the engine and put the car in reverse. As I backed out of the driveway, my mind raced, replaying the conversation in the kitchen. Something snagged in my memory, a tiny, discordant note in Patricia's flawless symphony of grief. Her heart condition is worsening. The medication is no longer effective. Grandma Lopez did not have a heart condition. She had a mild murmur diagnosed 10 years ago. It was monitored annually, and it had never required medication. She took pills for high blood pressure and a daily vitamin. That was it. I pulled my car to the side of the road, threw it into park, and stared blankly at the steering wheel. Why would Patricia lie about the medication? If Grandma was truly dying, Patricia would have all the medical facts perfectly memorized to maximize the sympathy. But she got the details wrong. She improvised. A nagging, persistent inconsistency gnawed at the edge of my despair. Patricia was a master manipulator, but she was arrogant. She assumed I would be too blinded by grief to verify her claims. I needed to see my grandmother, not to argue, not to cry, just to look at her. I pulled back onto the road, bypassing the route to my house. I headed toward the older, tree-lined neighborhoods of the North End, where Grandma Lopez lived in a small, historic bungalow. I parked down the street and walked up the cracked sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilac bushes. I approached her front gate, preparing myself to see a frail, failing woman. But as I pushed the wooden gate open, the scene unfolding in the garden brought me to an abrupt halt, leading to a discovery that would shift the entire balance of power. I pushed the rusted iron gate open, expecting the heavy silence of a house in mourning. The north end of Boise is famous for its historic bungalows and sprawling ancient trees. Usually, visiting my grandmother here brought me peace. Today, every step up the cracked concrete sidewalk felt like walking to an execution. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. I was preparing myself to see a frail, failing woman wrapped in blankets, counting her final days in a dimly lit living room. A sharp, metallic snap echoed from the side yard. I paused, my hand hovering over the porch railing. The sound came again. Snip! A rustle of leaves. Snip! I left the porch steps and walked around the corner of the house, following the noise toward the garden. The scent of damp soil and blooming lilac was thick in the warm afternoon air. Standing in the middle of a massive flower bed was Grandma Lopez. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, a faded denim button-down shirt, and thick canvas gardening gloves. She held a pair of heavy iron pruning shears in her right hand. With a swift, practiced motion, she clamped the blades around a thick branch of a sprawling hydrangea bush and severed it clean through. She did not look frail. She looked vibrant. Sweat beaded on her forehead, catching the Idaho sun. Her posture was straight, her movements fluid and purposeful. This was not a woman whose heart was failing. This was a woman who could probably outrun me. She tossed the severed branch onto a growing pile of yard waste, wiped her brow with the back of her canvas glove, and finally noticed me standing, frozen, on the grass. "Chloe," she called out, her voice loud and clear, carrying easily across the yard. "What on earth are you doing here on a Wednesday afternoon? You look like you have seen a ghost." I could not speak. I stared at her chest, watching the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. I looked at her flushed cheeks, the bright clarity in her dark eyes. My brain struggled to reconcile the dynamic, sweating woman in front of me with the tragic, dying figure Patricia had just painted in her pristine kitchen. Grandma stripped off her heavy gloves, her brow furrowing with concern. She dropped the shears into the dirt and walked toward me, her boots crunching over the dry mulch. She reached out and gripped my shoulders. Her grip was firm, her hands warm and strong. "Honey, what is wrong?" she asked, her tone shifting from cheerful surprise to sharp maternal instinct. "Are you hurt? Is it Nolan?" My throat tightened. A complicated knot of relief and renewed, burning fury twisted in my stomach. She was fine. Patricia had lied. My mother had looked me dead in the eye, squeezed my hand, and fabricated a terminal medical crisis just to justify stealing a venue deposit. I took a shaky breath, the crisp garden air filling my lungs. "Mom told me your heart condition was worsening," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "She told me the medication stopped working. She said you only had a few months left. And your dying wish was to see Brittany married before Kevin deploys." Grandma Lopez went entirely still. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a rigid, chilling stillness. Her hands remained on my shoulders, but her grip tightened until it almost hurt. She stared past me, looking toward the street, her eyes narrowing into dark, calculating slits. "My heart is fine," Grandma said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all its grandmotherly warmth and taking on the hardened edge of a matriarch who had just been crossed. "Dr. Evans gave me a clean bill of health 2 weeks ago. I do not even take medication for my murmur. Your mother knows that." She let go of my shoulders, turned her back to me, and walked over to the wooden bench resting beneath the shade of a weeping willow. She sat down, resting her elbows on her knees, and stared at the pile of severed hydrangea branches. I followed her, sitting on the opposite end of the bench. "Mom transferred my Coeur d'Alene venue reservation to Brittany," I explained, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a rushed, bitter stream. "She paid a premium to overwrite my contract. When I confronted her, she used your failing heart as her excuse. She said I was being a selfish monster for trying to deny a dying woman her final joy. She trapped me." Grandma did not gasp. She did not express shock. Instead, a grim, knowing shadow fell across her weathered face. 20 years ago, Grandma said, keeping her gaze fixed on the dirt. I blinked, confused by the sudden shift in topic. What? 20 years ago, your Aunt Clara planned a destination wedding in Mexico, Grandma continued, her voice steady and hollow, excavating a piece of family history I had never been allowed to see. Clara was Patricia's sister-in-law. Patricia despised the idea. She wanted the family to spend that Thanksgiving at her house, right after she bought that oversized property in Meridian. She wanted to host. She wanted the spotlight. She demanded Clara change the date. Clara refused. Grandma turned her head to look at me, the Idaho sun casting long shadows across her sharp cheekbones. A month before the final, non-refundable payments were due for the resort, Patricia announced she was pregnant with her second child. She claimed it was a high-risk pregnancy. She told the entire family her doctor strictly forbade travel, and the stress of missing Clara's wedding was threatening her health. I held my breath, the pieces sliding together with sickening precision. The family pressured Clara, Grandma said, her tone laced with old, festering resentment. They called her selfish. They said she was endangering an unborn child over a beach party. Clara caved. She canceled the resort. She lost thousands of dollars. The family stayed in Boise and spent Thanksgiving at Patricia's new house, showering her with attention and gifts for the new baby. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the afternoon heat. And the baby, I asked? Grandma scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. 2 weeks after Clara's cancellation deadlines passed, Patricia announced she had suffered a spontaneous, painless miscarriage. There were no medical records. There was no hospital visit. She just declared the tragedy over, soaked up the family's sympathy, and moved on. I always suspected she manufactured the entire crisis just to force Clara into submission, but I could never prove it. She played the victim too well. I stared at my hands resting in my lap. My mother was not just playing favorites. She was a clinical, calculating predator. She viewed family milestones as a zero-sum game, and she was willing to weaponize illness, grief, and even death to ensure she always controlled the board. I thought she was just protecting Brittany, I whispered. I thought she just loved her more. She does not love anyone more than she loves being in control, Grandma corrected sharply. Brittany is just a prop in her play. You are a threat because you built a life outside her theater. Grandma stood up. She walked over to the dirt, picked up her heavy iron shears, and turned to face me. The grandmotherly softness was gone. In its place stood a fierce, resilient woman, ready for war. She used my life as a bargaining chip to break your spirit, Grandma said, raising her chin. We are not going to let her get away with it. I stood up, the lingering remnants of my defeat burning away under the heat of her defiance. What do we do? If I expose her now, she will just spin another lie. She will say she misunderstood the doctor. The family will believe her. They will believe her if you attack her directly, Grandma agreed, tapping the metal shears against her gloved hand. So we do not attack. We let her think her trap worked. I furrowed my brow. We let her keep the venue? For now, Grandma said, a dangerous, predatory smile curving her lips. Let her spend her money. Let her plan her party. She thinks I am dying? Fine. I will give her a dying woman. I will call her tonight. I will sound weak. I will tell her how grateful I am for her sacrifice. I will get inside her inner circle. I will be your spy. The brilliance of the strategy hit me like a physical wave. Patricia relied on isolation. She thrived when her targets operated in the dark. But with Grandma embedded in her camp, feeding me her every move, the shadows would disappear. You go home, Chloe, Grandma ordered, pointing a stern finger at me. You act defeated. You stay quiet. You let her build her glass house. We will gather the stones. I nodded, feeling the first genuine surge of hope I had experienced all week. I hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of lilac and potting soil. It was the smell of a safe harbor. I walked back down the cracked sidewalk toward my car, my mind racing with new possibilities. The digital trap I had planted in the backdrop files was waiting. My grandmother was going undercover. The balance of power was shifting. I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I reached for the ignition, ready to drive home and brief Nolan on the new alliance. Before I could turn the key, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Marie, the owner of the local floral boutique I had hired months ago to handle my centerpieces. The message was short, but it sent a fresh spike of adrenaline straight into my veins. "Chloe, please call me immediately. Your mother just emailed my shop. She is trying to rewrite the entire floral contract and demanding we transfer your deposit to her account." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Patricia was not satisfied with the venue. She was moving on my vendors. She was trying to dismantle my wedding piece by piece, starving me of every local resource I had secured. I threw the car into drive. The war had officially breached the perimeter, and I had to lock down my supply lines before she burned them all to the ground. I pulled out of the historic North End, my tires squealing against the asphalt as I raced toward downtown Boise. Marie's text message was a blaring siren in my mind. Patricia was not just satisfied with the venue. She was methodically working her way down my vendor list, attempting to dismantle my wedding piece by piece. She wanted to ensure that even if I somehow found a new location, I would have no flowers, no food, and no photographer. She wanted me isolated and resourceless. Marie owned a small, highly sought-after floral boutique on Main Street. She specialized in wild, asymmetrical arrangements using native Idaho flora. She was an artist, not a corporate entity, and her business relied heavily on local reputation. I parked outside her shop and rushed through the glass door. The bell chimed overhead, cutting through the scent of eucalyptus and damp earth. Marie was standing behind the counter, her hands visibly trembling as she clutched a printed email. "Chloe, thank God," she breathed, rushing around the counter to meet me. "I do not understand what is happening. Your mother called the shop an hour ago. She was furious. She said the venue had been changed, the date was moved, and the floral order needed to be completely overhauled." Marie handed me the printout. I scanned the text. It was sent from an email address that looked suspiciously like mine, but offset by one letter. It read, "Marie, there has been a family emergency. We are transferring the Coeur d'Alene date to my cousin Brittany. Please apply my deposit to her new invoice and change the floral design from the moody wildflowers to classic tight white roses. Patricia will be your new point of contact." My jaw clenched. Patricia had created a fake email account to impersonate me. This was no longer just a manipulative family dispute. This was identity theft and wire fraud. "I did not write this, Marie," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "My mother forged this email. She stole the venue reservation, and now she is trying to steal my vendors." Marie sank onto a wooden stool, running a hand through her hair. "Chloe, I cannot get caught in the middle of a lawsuit. Patricia told me on the phone that if I did not cooperate and transfer the deposit, she would go to the local wedding forums and post reviews saying I was inflexible and unprofessional during a family medical crisis. I am a small business. A smear campaign like that could ruin my season." Patricia was weaponizing the fragile ecosystem of small-town commerce. She knew these vendors could not afford bad press, especially when she had already primed the family gossip network with her tragic tale of Grandma's failing heart. Before I could reassure Marie, my phone chimed. It was an email notification. Then another. I opened my inbox. The first was from my photographer, a talented local guy named David. The second was from the catering company. Both emails were nearly identical. They expressed deep apologies, but stated they were canceling my contracts and refunding my deposits. They cited scheduling conflicts and unforeseen circumstances, but I could read between the lines. Patricia had contacted them, confused them with conflicting orders, and threatened their reputations. They were bailing out to escape the blast radius of the Lopez family drama. I was losing ground fast. In under 24 hours, Patricia had compromised my venue, stolen my invitations, and triggered an exodus of my vendors. But I was no longer the paralyzed, grieving bride who had stood in Patricia's pristine kitchen ready to surrender. I had Grandma Lopez on my side. I had the truth. And I had anger, hot and focused, burning in my chest. "Marie," I said, my voice steady and commanding, "do not cancel my contract, and do not transfer the deposit to Patricia." Marie looked up, her eyes wide with anxiety. "But what about the reviews? She will destroy my online rating." "She will not have the chance," I promised. "But I need you to trust me." I pulled my laptop from my bag, set it on the floral counter, and opened a blank document. I quickly drafted a formal, legally binding non-disclosure agreement, pulling template language I used for sensitive corporate design clients. I turned the screen toward her. "I need you to sign this NDA," I explained. "It legally prevents you from discussing my wedding plans, my contracts, or my vendor relationships with any third party, including my mother. If she demands information, you tell her you are bound by a confidentiality agreement and cannot disclose any details." Marie read over the document, her hesitation warring with her artistic pride. She hated the idea of doing tight, classic white roses. She wanted to build the wild, moody installations we had planned together. "I will pay your remaining balance in full today," I added, pulling out my checkbook. Nolan and I had just enough emergency savings left to cover the local vendors, even with the venue deposits stolen. "I will guarantee your payment, but I need you to participate in a covert operation." Marie signed the NDA, the scratch of her pen loud in the quiet shop. "What is the operation?" "You pretend to work for Patricia," I said, a dangerous thrill running through me. "When she calls, you agree to her demands. You tell her you are sourcing the white roses. You let her think she has won. But behind the scenes, you build my dream. You source the fireweed and the syringa. You build the asymmetrical installations. You keep my original vision alive in the shadows." Marie's eyes sparked with a sudden conspiratorial gleam. A double-agent florist. I like it. I left her shop and immediately called the caterer and the photographer. I did not let them hide behind polite emails. I demanded face-to-face meetings. I rallied them at a local, dimly lit diner on the edge of town, far away from the manicured subdivisions where Patricia's network operated. I sat across from David the photographer and Marcus the caterer in a sticky vinyl booth. I did not sugarcoat the situation. I laid out the forged emails, the stolen venue, and the fake medical crisis. I showed them the NDA. "I am not asking you to take sides in a family fight," I told them, sliding the contracts across the table. "I am asking you to honor the original agreements and protect your own businesses from a woman who uses fraud and blackmail to get her way. I will pay you in full, up front. You sign the NDA. You tell Patricia you are handling her event, but on the day of the wedding, you deliver for me." David looked at the forged email I had printed out. He was a quiet, observant guy who made a living capturing authentic moments. He despised fake smiles and manufactured drama. "She threatened to post a review saying I was insensitive to a dying grandmother," David muttered, his jaw tight. "I hate bullies." He picked up a pen and signed the NDA. Marcus the caterer, a burly man with flour dusted on his apron, followed suit. He had spent hours perfecting the brisket recipe for my menu. He refused to serve Patricia's requested vegan salmon. The resistance was formed. My supply lines were secured, locked behind ironclad confidentiality agreements. Patricia thought she was systematically starving me out, but she was merely yelling into an echo chamber we had built for her. She was planning a wedding that would never materialize, using vendors who were actively working against her. I drove home that evening, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving me exhausted but victorious. We had fortified the perimeter. We had an inside spy in Grandma Lopez. We had secured the local logistics. But my mother was not a woman who accepted silence. When she realized her threats against the local vendors were not yielding the public capitulation she craved, she escalated her tactics. She realized she could not break my logistics, so she decided to break my foundation. If she could not isolate me from my vendors, she would isolate me from the man I was going to marry. She aimed her sights away from the small-town businesses and locked onto the wealthy, influential family I was marrying into, launching a strike that would force the invisible giant hiding in the shadows to finally awaken. My mother had always been a tactician. When her frontal assault on my local vendors failed to yield the public surrender she desired, she did not retreat. She pivoted. She realized that trying to starve my logistics was inefficient. To truly break my spirit, she needed to target my foundation. She needed to isolate me from the one person whose support made me dangerous, Nolan. Or more specifically, Nolan's family. The Bennett family resided in Eagle, Idaho, a wealthy enclave known for sprawling estates and quiet, generational money. Nolan's father, Richard, had built a corporate hospitality empire from the ground up. He was a man of few words, preferring to observe rather than opine. Nolan's mother, Susan, was a former interior designer with a sharp wit and zero tolerance for manufactured drama. They were my safe harbor. They treated me with a straightforward, uncomplicated affection that I had never experienced in my own home. Patricia knew this. She knew the Bennetts represented an escape hatch. If she could poison that well, if she could make Nolan's parents view me as a liability rather than a daughter-in-law, she could force Nolan to reconsider the engagement. She wanted to burn my sanctuary to the ground. The attack commenced on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my drafting table working on a freelance branding project when Nolan called. His voice was tight, the structural integrity of his usual calm demeanor fracturing slightly. "Chloe," he said, skipping the greeting entirely, "my mother just called me. Patricia phoned her an hour ago." My stomach plummeted. The drafting pen slipped from my fingers, leaving a dark ink stain on the crisp white paper. What did she say? Nolan exhaled, a long, controlled breath. "She told my mom that you are having a mental breakdown. She claimed the stress of planning the wedding has unhinged you, and that you are throwing paranoid tantrums about her trying to help Brittany. She suggested to my mother that you are emotionally unstable and completely unready for marriage. She framed it as a concerned mother seeking guidance from a future mother-in-law." The audacity was breathtaking. It was the exact same script she had used on the extended Lopez family, but weaponized with a new clinical edge. She was not just calling me a martyr anymore. She was calling me crazy. She was trying to plant the seed of doubt in the Bennett family, painting me as a fragile, damaged woman who would ruin their son's life. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I had secured my local vendors, but what good was a caterer if the groom's family demanded he walk away? "Nolan," I started, my voice trembling, "I swear I have not—" "Stop," Nolan interrupted, his tone instantly softening, grounding me. "Do not defend yourself to me, Chloe. I know who you are. I know exactly what she is doing. I just want you to be prepared. My parents want us to come over for dinner tonight." Prepared for what? Prepared for pity? Prepared for an intervention where Susan and Richard gently suggest we postpone the wedding until I seek therapy? The drive to Eagle felt like a march to the gallows. Nolan drove his truck along the winding, tree-lined roads that led toward the foothills. He reached across the center console and grabbed my hand, his grip tight and reassuring. But his knuckles were white. He was a man accustomed to fixing broken things. But dealing with his future mother-in-law's psychological warfare was entirely outside his blueprint. We pulled up to the Bennett estate, a sprawling, modern architectural marvel of glass and natural stone that blended seamlessly into the Idaho landscape. I stepped out of the truck, smoothing my dress, feeling like an imposter. I was the girl bringing chaos into their serene, orderly world. Susan opened the heavy oak door before we could even knock. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and carried 2 steaming mugs. She did not look at me with pity. She did not look at me with concern. She looked at me with profound annoyance. "Come inside, Chloe," Susan commanded, handing me one of the mugs. The ceramic was warm, filled with chamomile tea. "Your mother is a piece of work." I blocked her number. I blinked, the tension draining from my shoulders so fast, my knees almost buckled. "You did?" Susan led us into the expansive, open-concept living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Boise Valley, the city lights just beginning to twinkle in the twilight. "She called me blubbering about your mental state," Susan scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I listened for exactly 3 minutes. Then I told her that in my experience, the person calling to declare someone else crazy is usually the one holding the match. I told her to focus on Brittany's rushed military wedding and leave you alone. Then I blocked the number. I do not have time for suburban soap operas. A sudden, unexpected laugh barked out of my throat. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. The Bennett safe harbor was not burning. It was fortified with common sense. I sank onto the plush leather sofa, the warmth of the tea spreading through my chest. Nolan sat next to me, his shoulders visibly relaxing. We had survived the initial strike. But the room was not entirely clear. Sitting in a high-backed armchair near the grand stone fireplace was Nolan's father, Richard. He wore a crisp dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing expensive, understated cufflinks. He held a copy of the Wall Street Journal, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He had not said a word since we entered. Richard was a formidable presence. He had built Summit Hospitality from a single roadside motel into a regional corporate juggernaut. He commanded boardrooms with a quiet, lethal authority. I always felt a slight, reverent intimidation in his presence. He slowly lowered the newspaper, folding it meticulously along the crease. He took off his glasses and looked directly at me. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and entirely devoid of Susan's comforting warmth. "Nolan tells me you lost your venue," Richard said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that demanded attention. "Yes, sir," I replied, sitting up straighter. "He tells me the deposit was transferred to your cousin without your signature," Richard continued, leaning forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "That is correct." Richard did not react with outrage. He did not offer sympathy. He processed the information like a data point on a quarterly earnings report. "Which venue?" he asked. "The Coeur d'Alene estate," I answered, my voice steady, though my heart beat faster under his intense scrutiny. Richard tapped his index finger against the armrest, a slow, rhythmic tapping. "Who is the local manager handling the account?" "A woman named Sarah," I said. "I met with her at the corporate office downtown. She refused to reverse the transfer. She cited a regional policy regarding premium upgrades. She told me my mother absorbed my contract." Richard stopped tapping. He sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He did not frown. He did not smile. He simply stared at me, processing the names, the locations, and the specific corporate jargon I had just repeated. For 30 excruciating seconds, the living room was completely silent. The only sound was the crackle of the gas fireplace and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the distant kitchen. Susan glanced at her husband, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. But she did not speak. She knew better than to interrupt Richard when he was calculating a move. Finally, Richard picked up his reading glasses and slid them back onto his face. He picked up his newspaper, unfolding it with a crisp snap. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, Richard announced casually, his eyes scanning an article on municipal bonds. "We are having grilled salmon. I hope you brought an appetite, Chloe." He had dismissed the topic entirely. He offered no advice, no legal resources, no outrage. He just returned to his reading. I looked at Nolan, confused. Nolan offered a small, helpless shrug. We had expected resistance or support, but we received absolute, deafening indifference. I ate dinner in a fog. The conversation flowed around me, touching on golf, Nolan's recent promotion, and Susan's garden. Richard engaged politely, but he never brought up the Coeur d'Alene estate again. I felt a hollow disappointment settle in my chest. Susan had protected me from my mother's gossip, but Richard had dismissed the actual theft as trivial. I was alone in this fight. The corporate Goliath had looked at my $5,000 problem and deemed it unworthy of his attention. We said our goodbyes and walked back out to Nolan's truck. The night air was sharp and cold. "He does not care," I whispered, climbing into the passenger seat. I thought maybe because he knows the industry, he might have advice. But he does not care. Nolan started the engine. The headlights swept across the manicured driveway. "He cares, Chloe," Nolan said quietly. "You just do not know how to read him yet. My father never asks a question unless he already knows the answer." I frowned, staring out the window as we drove down the mountain. What did that mean? Richard had asked about the venue. He had asked about Sarah. Why ask if he already knew? The answer to that question would not arrive until the following evening, and when it did, it would not come as advice. It would come as a massive, world-altering revelation that would force me to decide exactly how far I was willing to go to destroy my mother's stolen dream. The glow of my laptop screen cut through the dark kitchen, illuminating the municipal court website. I stared at the marriage license requirements for Ada County. The fee was $30. A courthouse ceremony required a single witness and a 10-minute appointment. It was efficient. It was clean. It was the exact opposite of the sprawling, hijacked celebration currently occupying my mother's entire existence. I leaned back against the counter and closed my eyes. The exhaustion was setting in, settling deep into my bones. The secret meetings with local vendors, the covert alliance with my grandmother, the constant vigilance required to anticipate my mother's next psychological strike. It was draining me. Fighting a war against the woman who raised you requires a specific type of endurance, and my reserves were running dangerously low. Nolan walked into the kitchen, his stocking feet silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs working a tight knot near my neck. He looked at the screen, reading the stark text outlining the courthouse elopement process. "You do not have to surrender the day, Chloe," he said softly. His voice was a steady anchor in the quiet room. "We can find another venue. We can rebuild." I shook my head, keeping my eyes closed. "We do not have the capital, Nolan. Patricia trapped our cornerstone deposit. We are bleeding money just to keep the local vendors secured under the confidentiality agreements. I am tired of playing defense. If we elope, we cut the cord." We remove the prize from the board. She wins the venue, but she loses the audience. Nolan stopped massaging my shoulders. He reached past me and gently closed the laptop. The kitchen went dark, save for the ambient light filtering in from the street lamps outside. Before he could respond, his cell phone vibrated on the island. He picked it up, glancing at the caller ID. It was his father. Nolan answered, his tone shifting into the crisp, professional cadence he used for business. "Yes, we are home." "Now?" He looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly. "Understood. We are on our way." He ended the call and slid the phone into his pocket. "My father wants us at his downtown office." I checked the clock on the microwave. It was past 8 on a Friday night. "Why? Did something happen?" "He did not say," Nolan replied, grabbing his keys. "But my father does not schedule evening meetings unless the architecture of a deal is about to change." The drive to the Bennett Holdings corporate tower was quiet. The Boise cityscape slipped past the windows, a blur of amber streetlights and dark silhouettes of the foothills. We parked in the underground executive garage and took the private elevator to the penthouse suite. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, dimly lit reception area. The air smelled of expensive polished wood and faint ozone. We bypassed the empty administrative desks and walked straight back to Richard's private office. The room was vast, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard sat behind a massive mahogany desk, illuminated by a single brass reading lamp. He wore a crisp white shirt, the collar unbuttoned, his tie discarded over the back of a leather armchair. He was pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Take a seat," Richard instructed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that filled the quiet room. Nolan and I sat on the long leather sofa positioned across from his desk. A sleek, glass-topped coffee table separated us. Richard finished pouring his drink. He did not offer us one. He picked up his glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and walked around the desk to stand in front of the windows. He looked out at the city lights for a long moment before turning to face me. "Nolan tells me you are contemplating a courthouse elopement," Richard stated. It was not a question. It was a fact he had acquired and was now analyzing. I sat up straighter, smoothing the fabric of my jeans. "Yes, sir. My mother executed a financial strike that trapped our venue deposit. To continue fighting for a traditional wedding would require capital we no longer possess, and it would cause collateral damage to the family structure. Eloping neutralizes her leverage." "A pragmatic retreat," Richard murmured, swirling the liquid in his glass. "Efficient, logical, and entirely unacceptable." I blinked, taken aback by the sudden sharpness in his tone. "Unacceptable?" Richard walked toward the coffee table. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a slim silver iPad, and tapped the screen a few times, unlocking a document. Without breaking eye contact with me, he placed the tablet flat on the glass surface and slid it across the table. The metal backing hissed softly against the glass, stopping mere inches from my hands. "Read it," he commanded. I leaned forward and looked at the glowing screen. It was a corporate organizational chart, a complex web of lines and boxes detailing a massive corporate structure. At the very top, in bold, stark lettering, read Bennett Holdings. My eyes traced the lines descending from the parent company, mapping the various subsidiaries. Real estate acquisitions, commercial development, and then a branch labeled Summit Hospitality Group. My pulse hitched. I followed the line down from Summit Hospitality. It splintered into dozens of regional properties. Halfway down the list, nestled between a resort in Sun Valley and a lodge in Jackson Hole, was the Coeur d'Alene Estate. I stared at the name. Right beneath it, listed as Regional Director of Operations, was Sarah, the woman who had stonewalled me in the lobby. The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt. I looked up at Richard. He was watching me with the predatory stillness of a hawk. "You own it," I whispered, the reality of the chart crashing over me. "You own the parent company. You own the venue." "I own the ground the estate sits on," Richard said, his voice cold and precise. "I own the catering contracts. I own the linen suppliers. And I sign the paycheck of the woman who dismissed you in my lobby." My mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. "You knew. When we were at your house for dinner, when you asked me those specific questions about Sarah and the regional policy, you already knew." "I suspected," Richard corrected. "I spent the following morning running a compliance audit on the Coeur d'Alene ledger. Your local manager, Sarah, bypassed 3 separate primary authorization protocols. She approved an illegal contract transfer because your mother offered a $10,000 premium upgrade. Sarah receives a quarterly commission based on premium upsells. She jeopardized the legal integrity of my corporation to line her own pockets. It is actionable corporate fraud." A wave of intense, overwhelming relief washed over me. The institutional brick wall I had been smashing my head against was an illusion. The man standing in front of me held the hammer that could shatter it into dust. "So you fired her," I said, a breathless laugh escaping my lips. "You reversed the transfer. We have the date back." Richard did not smile. He did not mirror my relief. He took another sip of his drink and stared down at me with an expression of hardened steel. "I have done nothing," Richard said. The relief evaporated, replaced by a jarring, profound confusion. "What? Why?" "Because handing you a victory does not teach you how to defend it," Richard replied, his tone shifting from corporate executive to relentless mentor. "In business and in family, power is only valuable in the hands of someone with the courage to hold it. Your mother thrives because she relies on your conditioning. She expects you to fold. She expects you to retreat to a courthouse and lick your wounds in silence." He set his glass down on the desk with a sharp clink. "I can make one phone call tonight," he continued, leaning over the coffee table. "I can terminate Sarah, refund your mother her fraudulent premium, and reinstate your booking. I can fix this for you. But if I do, Patricia will simply find another angle. She will attack your career. She will attack your future children. She will never stop until you prove that you are an apex predator in your own life." Richard locked his eyes onto mine, challenging me, daring me to rise to the occasion. "I am offering you the entire arsenal of my corporation, Chloe, but you have to pull the trigger. So tell me, what is your play?" The question hung in the quiet office, heavy with expectation. He was testing a future CEO. He was testing the woman who would stand beside his son. I looked down at the iPad. I looked at the name of the venue, at the intricate corporate web that Richard controlled. I thought about the forged emails. I thought about the stolen blueprints embedded with my hidden watermark. I thought about Grandma Lopez pruning her hydrangeas, waiting in the shadows. The victim inside me, the girl who wanted to flee to the mountains and hide, died in that leather chair. The strategist woke up. I sat up straight, squaring my shoulders. The ice in my veins turned into a steady, rhythmic fire. "We do not cancel her contract," I said, my voice dropping into a cool, measured cadence. Nolan raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. Richard remained perfectly still, waiting. "If we cancel her contract now, she plays the victim again," I explained, the pieces of the trap clicking together with lethal precision. "She tells the family the evil corporate venue ruined a dying grandmother's dream. We do not give her an exit strategy." I looked at Richard. "I want you to reinstate my original contract in your hidden internal ledger. I want my date locked. I want Sarah terminated for fraud, bound by an ironclad non-disclosure agreement before she is escorted from the building." Richard nodded slowly, a dark gleam appearing in his eyes. "And Patricia?" "We let Patricia keep her front-facing client portal," I said, the corners of my mouth lifting into a dangerous, humorless smile. "We let her receive the automated updates. We let her keep planning her stolen victory. We let her spend thousands of dollars on her fake catering and her white roses. We let her invite every toxic aunt and uncle to the mountain. We let her walk right up to the wrought iron gates on the day of the wedding." "And then?" Nolan asked, his gaze fixed on me, a mixture of awe and fierce pride radiating from him. "And then we locked the gates," I finished softly. "We let her crash into a wall of corporate security. We execute the event she paid for, but we do it with my original vendors, my original design, and my true guests. We let her build her own gallows, and we hand her the rope." Richard stared at me for a long, silent moment. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He reached down, picked up the iPad, and turned it off. "I will have the legal department draft Sarah's termination papers by morning," Richard said. "The venue is yours, Chloe. We had the location. We had the logistics. We had the corporate hammer. The trap was perfectly constructed, ready to snap shut on my mother's grand illusion." But there was one lingering variable, one wild card that could unravel the entire operation if I did not neutralize it first. Brittany. My cousin was the face of this stolen wedding. She possessed the stolen blueprints. She was the golden child standing on the pedestal Patricia had built. To ensure the trap worked flawlessly, I needed to confront the thief directly. I needed to look Brittany in the eye and warn her to step down before the hammer fell. I thought I knew exactly how that confrontation would go. I expected denial. I expected arrogance. I expected her to parrot Patricia's lies. What I did not expect was for the meeting to shatter everything I thought I knew about the enemy camp, leading to a twist that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of our family war. The crisp Saturday morning air carried a deceptive sense of peace. The dust from Richard's staggering revelation had barely settled, leaving me with a newfound razor-sharp clarity. I was standing in my kitchen, watching the Idaho sun rise over the Boise foothills, pouring a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. We had the corporate hammer. We had the logistics secured. The trap was set and waiting in the shadows. Then my cell phone vibrated against the granite counter, shattering the morning calm. The caller ID flashed the name Valerie. She was the owner of the downtown bridal boutique where my custom lace gown was being tailored. Valerie was a meticulous, no-nonsense seamstress who treated her creations like priceless artifacts. I answered the call. "Chloe, you need to get down here right now," Valerie whispered, her voice tight with suppressed outrage. "I am hiding in my back stockroom. Your cousin is standing in my showroom. She brought in a cheap, mass-produced dress she bought off the rack somewhere, and she is demanding I replicate your exact custom lace applique. She wants the identical scalloped hem and the exact sleeve tapering I designed for you. She says you canceled your event and gave her permission to use the design." The mug in my hand felt suddenly heavy. The sheer, predatory greed of the request was staggering. Brittany was not content with stealing the Coeur d'Alene estate or downloading my digital invitations. She wanted to wear my very identity. She wanted to walk down the aisle in a stolen location, surrounded by stolen flowers, wearing a counterfeit version of my dress. "Do not touch her dress, Valerie," I said, setting my coffee down. "Ask her to leave." "I am on my way." I grabbed my keys and sprinted out the door. My pulse hammered against my ribs, fueled by a searing, righteous fury. I was ready to unleash every ounce of the anger I had been stockpiling for the past 2 weeks. I wanted to corner my cousin in that pristine showroom, surrounded by white tulle and mirrors, and tear down her golden child facade. I drove toward the boutique, weaving through the light weekend traffic. But as I turned onto the main downtown avenue, I saw Brittany's recognizable white SUV pulling out of the boutique parking lot. Valerie had already kicked her out. I did not let her go. I merged behind her SUV, keeping 2 cars between us, tailing her as she navigated away from the city center. She drove toward the outskirts of town, eventually pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a deserted standalone coffee shop just off Interstate 84. It was a relic from the early 2000s, boasting faded neon signs and peeling exterior paint. It was the kind of place people only stopped at when they were running on empty, both literally and figuratively. I parked 2 spaces away from her vehicle. The morning sun glared off the windshields. I stepped out of my car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and pushed through the heavy glass door of the cafe. The interior smelled of burnt espresso and harsh lemon cleaner. The dining area was entirely empty, save for one person sitting in a dim corner booth facing the highway. Brittany. She sat slumped against the worn vinyl seat, staring down at a paper cup of lukewarm latte. She wore oversized sunglasses and a bulky sweater, looking small and fragile against the faded Formica table. I marched across the sticky linoleum floor, every step radiating hostility. I had my speech prepared. I was going to dissect her entitlement. I was going to warn her that the stolen venue was a sinking ship, and if she did not step down immediately, she would drown alongside Patricia. I slid into the booth directly across from her. Brittany flinched, startled by the sudden movement. She reached up and pulled off her sunglasses. The words died in my throat. The girl sitting across from me was not the polished, arrogant pageant queen my mother worshipped. Brittany's eyes were bloodshot and swollen, the delicate skin beneath them bruised with profound exhaustion. Her hands trembled as they wrapped around the paper cup. The glossy, untouchable veneer was entirely gone, stripped away to reveal a terrified, exhausted young woman. Before I could deliver a single threat, a tear escaped her lash line and dropped straight into her coffee. Then another. She folded her arms on the table and hid her face, her shoulders shaking with silent, ragged sobs. The sound of her crying dismantled my fury. It was not a manipulative, theatrical display like the tears Patricia could summon on command. This was the raw, ugly sound of someone breaking under an unbearable weight. "Brittany," I said, my voice losing its sharp edge, dropping into a cautious whisper, "what is happening?" She took a shuddering breath, keeping her face buried in her arms. "I hate him," she sobbed, the words muffled against her sleeves. "I hate him so much. I do not want to marry Kevin." I sat back against the vinyl seat, stunned. Kevin was her fiancé. He was a wealthy, charismatic real estate developer from a prominent political family. Patricia constantly bragged about his pedigree, treating his inclusion in the family as a major social victory. "Why are you marrying him then?" I asked, the confusion stalling my initial anger. Brittany lifted her head, wiping her wet cheeks with the back of her trembling hand. "Because I cannot stop it, Chloe. He is a monster behind closed doors. He tracks my phone location every hour. He dictates what I wear. If I gain 2 pounds, he makes comments about my discipline. He isolates me from my friends. I tried to leave him 3 months ago." She picked up a napkin and twisted it between her fingers, tearing the paper into tiny shreds. "I went to Aunt Patricia," Brittany continued, her voice cracking. "I told her I was scared of him. I told her I wanted to call off the engagement. Do you know what she said? She told me I was suffering from cold feet. She said Kevin comes from a brilliant family, and I would be a fool to throw away a life of luxury over minor disagreements. She told me to fix my makeup and stop embarrassing the family." The puzzle pieces began shifting, realigning into a horrifying new picture. Patricia was not just prioritizing Brittany out of love. Patricia was using Brittany as a vehicle for her own social climbing. My mother wanted a state senator's son in her family tree, and she did not care if her niece had to endure psychological torment to secure that branch. "But why steal my venue?" I asked, leaning forward, needing to understand the architecture of my mother's deception. "If you want it out, why let her move your date up?" Brittany looked at me, her red-rimmed eyes filled with a hollow, crushing guilt. "It was a trap, Chloe. When Kevin found out I tried to leave, he demanded we move the wedding up before his deployment to secure the marriage. I refused. I told Patricia we could not afford to expedite the ceremony anyway. I thought the lack of funds would buy me time to escape." She pointed a shaking finger at her cell phone, resting on the table. 2 days later, Patricia called me, Brittany said, her voice dropping to a hollow whisper. She told me she had secured the Coeur d'Alene estate. She told me she paid the premium, moved the date, and arranged the entire timeline. She framed it as the ultimate sacrifice. She told me, "Look what your family is doing for you. Look what Chloe gave up for you. You cannot back out now. You would humiliate your dying grandmother. You would ruin the thousands of dollars we spent." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Patricia had not stolen the venue just to punish me. She stole the venue to forge a pair of golden handcuffs for Brittany. By manufacturing a grand, expensive sacrifice, Patricia engineered a situation where Brittany would look like an ungrateful villain if she canceled the wedding. Patricia used my stolen dream to trap her own niece at the altar, securing her precious social status. I thought you were in on it, I breathed, staring at the girl I had resented my entire life. I thought you hacked my cloud account to steal my designs because you wanted my life. Patricia made me do it, Brittany cried, shaking her head frantically. She gave me your password. She stood over my shoulder in her kitchen and ordered me to download the files. She said we had to save money on invitations, since she spent so much on the venue premium. I went to the boutique today because she threatened to call Kevin and tell him I was being difficult if I did not secure a dress immediately. I do not want your dress, Chloe. I do not want this wedding. I just want out. I looked at my cousin. For 28 years, I thought we were playing on opposite sides of a rigged game. I was the scapegoat and she was the golden child. But the truth was far more sinister. We were just different props on the exact same stage. The golden cage is still a cage, and Patricia was the only one holding the key. Brittany reached for her phone. She unlocked a screen and slid the device across the Formica table. "Look," she whispered. I looked at the screen. It was an open email thread between Patricia and the Summit Hospitality Billing Department. There were digital receipts detailing the $10,000 premium upgrade. There were bank transfer confirmations proving Patricia had forged the authorization documents. Beneath those were text messages from Patricia to Brittany, laced with subtle, terrifying threats about family loyalty and Kevin's political connections. It was the smoking gun. It was every piece of physical evidence I needed to permanently dismantle my mother's empire of lies. Brittany was willingly handing me the sword. I stared at the receipts, then looked up at my cousin. The anger that had fueled me for weeks evaporated, replaced by a profound, unyielding empathy. We were both victims of the exact same abuser. I slid the phone back across the table. I reached out and covered her trembling hands with my own. "You are not marrying him," I said, my voice ringing with an ironclad certainty that startled us both. "You are not walking down that aisle." Brittany let out a choked, desperate laugh. "How? Patricia holds all the cards. The invitations are out. The venue is locked. The family thinks I am the luckiest bride in Idaho. If I run, they will destroy me." "They will not have the chance to destroy you," I promised, a dangerous, strategic smile slowly forming on my face. "Because the venue is not locked. Patricia does not hold the cards anymore." Brittany wiped her eyes, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What do you mean?" I leaned across the table, lowering my voice into a conspiratorial whisper. The war was no longer a solo mission. The dynamic had officially flipped. The two erased daughters were about to form an alliance that Patricia would never see coming. "I am going to tell you a secret, Brittany," I said, the scent of stale coffee fading into the background as the master plan finally took its true shape. "And then we are going to burn her theater to the ground." I left the coffee shop with a flash drive containing every digital receipt Brittany had exported from her phone. The drive sat in my cup holder during the drive back to Boise, a tiny silver rectangle holding the power to dismantle a matriarch. My cousin had driven away in the opposite direction, her shoulders noticeably lighter, armed with a burner phone I had purchased for her at a gas station down the highway. Our alliance was born in the shadows, and it needed to stay there. That night, the clock on my microwave ticked past 11. I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop open. Nolan stood beside me, pouring 2 glasses of water. The screen flickered to life, dividing into 4 separate video squares. The War Council was officially in session. In the top left square sat Richard Bennett. He was in his home study, bathed in the amber glow of a desk lamp, a leather-bound notebook resting open in front of him. In the top right was Grandma Lopez. She sat in her floral armchair, a cup of herbal tea steaming in her hands, looking sharp and awake. In the bottom left was Brittany. She was parked in a dark grocery store lot using the burner phone, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. And in the bottom right, Nolan and I anchored the grid. 4 people who had been manipulated, dismissed, or targeted by Patricia. We were the alliance of the erased, gathering to draw our own map. "Let us review the board," Richard began, his voice transmitting through the speakers with crisp authority. "Brittany, what is your current operational status with your aunt?" Brittany adjusted the phone on her dashboard. "Patricia thinks I am still browsing for a dress. She is finalizing the catering menu tomorrow. She put down another $2,000 of her own money today to secure a luxury string quartet because Kevin's parents are attending. She thinks she has everything under control." "And your health, Florence?" Richard asked, addressing my grandmother with a tone of profound respect. Grandma took a slow sip of her tea. "Patricia came over this afternoon. She brought me a bowl of lukewarm soup and spent 45 minutes complaining about how difficult it is to plan a wedding on such short notice. She actually asked me if I could alter my will to help cover the premium she paid Summit Hospitality. I coughed into a handkerchief and told her my lawyer was out of town. She is eager to collect, but she is getting impatient." The sheer predatory nature of my mother's actions settled over the digital meeting. She was bleeding her own finances dry to impress a political family while actively trying to siphon money from a woman she claimed was dying. "This is where we draw the line," I said, leaning closer to the microphone. "We do not stop her. We do not send a cease and desist. We do not cancel her secondary contract in the public portal." Brittany leaned closer to her camera. "If we do not stop her, she is going to send out the final invitations next week. Kevin's family has invited 50 people. Patricia has invited her entire country club circle. There will be over 80 people showing up to the Coeur d'Alene estate." "Let them come," I replied, the strategy crystallizing in my mind. Let her spend her money on the string quartet. Let her pay for the premium catering. Let her build the most extravagant illusion she can afford. If we cut the cord now, she plays the victim. She will spin a narrative that I am a vindictive daughter who ruined a dying woman's dream just to be spiteful. She needs to build her own gallows." Richard nodded slowly, making a single, precise note in his leather journal. "A controlled demolition. You let the structure reach maximum height before you detonate the foundation. It ensures total collapse." "But what about your wedding, Chloe?" Grandma asked, setting her teacup down. "How do you get married on that mountain if Patricia has 80 guests wandering around the patio?" "Because they will never make it past the front gate," I said. "Richard will ensure the perimeter is secure. Patricia is paying for a party, but she does not own the property. On the day of the event, the only people allowed through those gates will be our true guests." Which brought us to the most delicate phase of the operation, the guest list. We could not use the traditional postal system. A physical invitation could be intercepted, photographed, or leaked back to Patricia's network. We needed a secure, untraceable method to rally our genuine supporters without alerting the enemy camp. I tapped my keyboard, adding a 5th person to the video call. The screen adjusted, creating a new square. Taylor, my maid of honor, appeared. She was sitting in her home office, a headset secured over her ears, surrounded by color-coded spreadsheets. Taylor was an event logistics coordinator for a tech firm. She managed chaos for a living. "Taylor has the encrypted guest matrix," I announced, introducing her to the council. Taylor offered a sharp, professional nod to the group. "I have scrubbed the original list," she explained, her fingers flying across her unseen keyboard. "I removed every aunt, uncle, and family friend who bought into Patricia's Facebook narrative. I removed anyone with a known history of gossiping to your mother. We are left with 130 loyal guests. Nolan's family, Chloe's close friends, and the few Lopez relatives who saw through the lies." "How do we notify them without triggering an alarm?" Richard asked, analyzing the logistical flaw. "Digital burn notices," Taylor replied seamlessly. "Tomorrow morning, all 130 guests will receive a password-protected link via text message. The link utilizes a single-view protocol. Once the recipient opens the link and reads the message, the page permanently deletes itself. There will be no digital footprint left to forward or screenshot. Brittany exhaled a breath of pure awe. What does the message say? I looked at the camera, visualizing the exact typography I had designed for the covert alert. It says, "The wedding is on. Same time, same location. Do not tell Patricia." The silence that followed was electric. Every person on the screen understood the gravity of the snare we were setting. We were executing a shadow wedding directly underneath my mother's nose. "Brittany," I said, shifting my focus back to my cousin, "your only job is to play the stressed bride. Nod your head. Let Patricia handle the details. When the day arrives, you ride in the car with her to the venue. You do not flinch until you see the security guards at the gate." "I can do that," Brittany whispered, a fierce, unfamiliar resolve hardening her features. "I am ready." "Florence," Richard said, addressing my grandmother, "keep gathering intelligence. If Patricia shifts her timeline or attempts to hire private security for Kevin's family, we need to know immediately." "I will keep her talking," Grandma promised, a dangerous glint in her dark eyes. "She loves an audience when she thinks she is winning." "And Richard," I said, turning to the patriarch, "we have the strategy, we have the guest list. But none of this works if Patricia can claim legal ownership of the reservation on the day of the event. We need to formalize the reversal. We need to strip her of her contractual rights without triggering an alert in her portal." Richard closed his leather-bound notebook. The amber light caught the sharp angles of his face. "Tomorrow at noon. Come to my office. We will execute the paperwork. Sarah's termination is already drafted. By this time tomorrow, you will hold the deed to the day, and your mother will be holding a ghost contract." The War Council adjourned. The video squares blinked out one by one, leaving my kitchen bathed in silence. Nolan wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on the top of my head. We stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The emotional terrain had shifted entirely. I was no longer grieving the loss of my wedding. I was anticipating the reclamation of my autonomy. Patricia thought she was the architect of my ruin, but she was merely a guest walking blindfolded into a labyrinth I had designed. To spring the trap with flawless precision, I needed to solidify the legal foundation. The shadow play required an ironclad contract to back it up. The next morning, I dressed in a tailored blazer, grabbed my portfolio, and drove back to the towering glass and steel structure of Bennett Holdings. I was not walking in as a desperate bride begging for a refund. I was walking in to sign the execution order for my mother's grand illusion. The beauty of true power lies in its silence. It does not announce itself with raised voices or theatrical threats. It arrives in the quiet slide of a glass door, the heavy weight of a mahogany desk, and the simple scratch of a fountain pen across paper. I wore a tailored navy blazer and stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard Bennett's downtown Boise office. Nolan stood beside me, his hands resting in his pockets. We were not the main event today. We were the audience. At precisely noon, the heavy oak doors opened. Sarah walked in. She wore the same charcoal suit she had worn the day she dismissed me in the lobby. Her posture was rigid, projecting the polished confidence of a regional manager reporting to the chief executive. Then her eyes landed on me. The confidence fractured. Her steps faltered for a fraction of a second, her gaze darting between me and Richard. She quickly masked the hesitation with a tight, professional smile, clutching her leather portfolio against her ribs. "Mr. Bennett," Sarah said, her voice pitched a degree too high. "You requested a briefing on the northern properties. Take a seat, Sarah," Richard instructed. He did not look up from the open manila folder resting on his desk. Sarah sat on the edge of the leather chair. She kept her spine perfectly straight, but I noticed her knuckles turning white around her portfolio. Richard turned a page in the folder. The crisp sound of the paper seemed deafening in the quiet room. How is the Coeur d'Alene estate performing this quarter? Sarah cleared her throat. Revenue is up 12% year over year. We have secured several premium upgrades for the upcoming summer season. The ledger is strong. Richard closed the folder and folded his hands over the manila cover. He looked at her. Let us discuss one of those premium upgrades, specifically the Lopez reservation scheduled for next month. A bead of sweat materialized at her hairline. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Yes, of course, there was a slight administrative shift with that booking. The primary sponsor requested a transfer to a new beneficiary and authorized a $10,000 premium to lock the date. Standard procedure under Regional Policy Section 4. Richard did not blink. Standard procedure requires the physical or verified digital signature of the primary contract holder to release the date. Did you secure Chloe's signature? Sarah shifted in her seat. The leather creaked. The primary financial sponsor on the incidentals account initiated the transfer. It was a family matter, the mother assured me. Richard raised a single hand. The gesture was slight, but it cut her off instantly. You do not manage family matters, Sarah. You manage corporate assets. You bypassed 3 separate compliance protocols to approve a fraudulent transfer. You did this because the $10,000 premium triggered a substantial quarterly commission bonus for your division. Sarah opened her mouth, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. Mr. Bennett, I can explain. The client was highly persuasive, and I believed I was acting in the best financial interest of Summit Hospitality. You acted in your own financial interest, Richard corrected, his tone dropping to a lethal, gravelly register. You exposed this corporation to a severe liability lawsuit. You accepted a forged authorization. You stole a venue from my future daughter-in-law. The color drained from Sarah's face. Her eyes widened, darting toward Nolan, then toward me, the pieces of the puzzle finally snapping together in her mind. She realized she had not just swindled a random bride. She had swindled the heir to the Bennett empire. I am sorry, Sarah stammered, her corporate armor shattering into a million irreparable pieces. I did not know. I can fix this. I can reverse the transfer today. You will not touch the transfer, Richard stated. You are terminated, effective immediately. Sarah shrank back into the chair, the fight leaving her body. Your access to the corporate mainframe was revoked 10 minutes ago, Richard continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. You are stripped of your severance package due to gross misconduct and breach of contract. My legal team has drafted a non-disclosure agreement. You will sign it, or we will pursue criminal charges for wire fraud. Security is waiting in the hall to escort you to your vehicle. Sarah did not argue. She took the pen Richard offered with a trembling hand, scribbled her name on the legal document, and stood up. She did not look at me as she walked out the door. 2 men in dark suits flanked her the moment she stepped into the hallway. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. The room returned to its pristine, imposing silence. Richard picked up the manila folder and dropped it into a shredder beside his desk. He opened a side drawer and pulled out a fresh, unmarked contract. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. I walked over to the desk and looked down at the paper. It was the standard Coeur d'Alene estate booking agreement. My name was printed at the top. The date was my original date. The total balance due, however, read $0. The venue is comped, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. Consider it an early wedding gift. Your initial $5,000 deposit has been wired back into your checking account. I picked up the fountain pen. The metal was cool against my skin. I signed my name on the dotted line, feeling the profound, undeniable weight of reclaimed territory. I had my date. I had my location. I had my money. But signing the contract was only the first half of the operation. We needed to ensure Patricia remained entirely unaware of the shift in power. My IT department isolated Patricia's account profile this morning, Richard explained, anticipating my next thought. They created a digital sandbox. When Patricia logs into the client portal, she will see a simulated dashboard. She will receive automated confirmation emails for her catering choices and floral delivery times. The system will process her payments and deposit them into a holding escrow. To her, the event is fully operational. On our end, she does not exist. It was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. We were letting her navigate a phantom ship. For the next 3 weeks, the contrast between Patricia's loud public bragging and our quiet, shadowy preparation was stark. Patricia utilized every opportunity to broadcast her manufactured triumph. She held court at her weekly country club luncheons, lamenting the stress of planning a luxury wedding on such short notice, soaking up the praise from her wealthy friends. She documented every fabricated milestone on Instagram. She posted a photo of a delicate white rose arrangement with the caption, "Finalizing the centerpieces for my beautiful Brittany." She posted a snapshot of a signed contract for a luxury string quartet, adding, "Only the best for my family." She even posted a stylized digital countdown clock, 10 days until the magic happens. I watched her digital performance from the quiet sanctuary of my own living room. I did not block her. I did not mute her stories. I watched every single post, fueling my resolve. Grandma Lopez played her role flawlessly. She invited Patricia over for tea, coughing delicately into a tissue, while Patricia bragged about the customized menu she had forced the caterer to accept. Grandma nodded, offered weak smiles, and immediately called me the moment Patricia's silver sedan pulled out of her driveway to report the latest developments. Brittany endured the charade with a newfound, silent strength. She attended dress fittings for the cheap gown she had bought off the rack, nodding along as Patricia dictated the alterations. She smiled for the selfies. She answered Kevin's controlling phone calls with detached, monosyllabic responses. She knew the golden cage was about to swing open, and she just had to hold her breath until we reached the finish line. Meanwhile, Taylor executed the shadow logistics. The encrypted digital burn notices were a total success. 130 true guests received the covert update. 130 guests RSVP'd through a secure hidden link. Not a single word leaked back to the enemy camp. The local vendors were primed. Marie ordered the native Idaho wildflowers. Marcus finalized the brisket marinade. David prepped his camera gear. They all knew the real plan, and they were eager to watch the righteous execution of the fraudulent matriarch who had threatened their livelihoods. The final 3 weeks vanished in a blur of quiet, calculated preparation. We built an invisible fortress right on top of Patricia's glass house. Then, the waiting was over. The sun dipped behind the Boise foothills on a Friday evening, casting long purple shadows across the valley. The countdown clock on Patricia's Instagram story hit 0. Tomorrow was the day. She thought she was waking up to a coronation. She thought she was going to stand on that mountain, surrounded by the elite social circle she coveted, presenting the perfect niece to the perfect political family. She had no idea she was driving straight into a concrete wall. I set my phone down on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of Nolan's breathing beside me in the dark. The pieces were all in place. The snare was pulled taut. The morning sun would rise, the trap would spring shut, and the final reckoning would begin at the iron gates. Saturday arrived wrapped in the kind of flawless Idaho weather that wedding planners pray for. The sky above Lake Coeur d'Alene was a blinding, unbroken blue, the water reflecting the sunlight like polished sapphire. The pine trees swayed gently, framing the sprawling estate. Everything looked perfectly serene, utterly belying the tactical warfare about to unfold. I stood by the second-story window of the bridal suite, the heavy lace of my custom gown brushing the hardwood floor. Below me, the wrought iron gates of the venue stood closed. 2 private security guards, imposing men in dark suits with earpieces, flanked the entrance. A third man, the corporate security director for Bennett Holdings, stood a few paces back, holding a digital tablet. They were the immovable object waiting for the unstoppable force of my mother's ego. Nolan's family had already arrived through a private rear entrance, seamlessly joining my carefully vetted guests on the terrace. Taylor was downstairs coordinating the vendors who had spent the morning working in quiet, frenetic harmony. Marie had transformed the arbor with wild, asymmetrical arrangements of fireweed and syringa. Marcus was currently tending to the brisket smokers. They had delivered my exact vision, entirely funded by Richard's comped contract, right under the invisible nose of my mother's phantom event. At exactly 1:45, a white luxury SUV crunched up the gravel drive. The vehicle parked just outside the perimeter. The driver's side door opened, and Patricia stepped out. She wore a sharply tailored navy pantsuit, a strand of pearls resting against her collarbone. She surveyed the estate, her posture radiating absolute ownership. She looked like a queen surveying a conquered territory. The passenger door opened. Brittany emerged. She was wearing the mass-produced, overly beaded white gown Patricia had forced upon her. A gaudy, cathedral-length veil was pinned to her hair, trailing behind her in the dust. She looked stiff, her movements mechanical. A reluctant actor walking onto a stage she desperately wanted to escape. Behind them, a string of high-end vehicles began pulling into the designated guest lot. Kevin's politically connected family, Patricia's country club circle, the aunts and uncles who had swallowed the narrative whole. The toxic audience had arrived for the matinee. Patricia did not wait for them. She linked her arm through Brittany's and marched toward the wrought iron gates. I pressed my palm flat against the cool glass of the window, my heart hammering a fierce rhythm against my ribs. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Patricia called out, offering the security guards a bright, artificial smile. She attempted to walk right past them. The two guards smoothly shifted, blocking her path entirely. The corporate director stepped forward, raising a hand. "May I see your invitation, ma'am?" The director asked, his voice a low, even rumble that carried easily up to the second floor. Patricia stopped, her artificial smile faltering. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Invitation. I am Patricia Lopez. I am the mother of the bride. And this," she said, gesturing grandly to Brittany, "is the bride. We are hosting the event today." The director looked down at his digital tablet, swiping a finger across the screen. "I apologize, ma'am, but your name is not on the cleared entry manifest. This venue is exclusively secured today for the Lopez-Bennett wedding." The air in the courtyard seemed to vanish. Patricia stared at the man, her mind struggling to process the combination of words he had just spoken. "The Lopez-Bennett wedding," Patricia repeated, her voice rising in pitch, the sharp edge of panic bleeding through. "That is impossible." "I transferred that contract. I paid a $10,000 premium. I have the receipts in my email. Call Sarah. Call the regional manager immediately." "Sarah is no longer employed by Summit Hospitality," the director stated with chilling finality. "Her termination was effective 3 weeks ago due to fraudulent contract manipulation. The fraudulent premium you paid was reversed and refunded to your original payment method early this morning. You hold no legal claim to this property." Patricia's face drained of color. The polished, unbothered facade cracked wide open, revealing the desperate, grasping control underneath. She looked back at the growing crowd of her invited guests who were now standing near their cars, watching the altercation with confused, murmured whispers. Kevin, Brittany's fiancé, was pushing his way to the front of the crowd, looking angry and impatient. "This is a mistake," Patricia shrieked, the volume of her voice shattering the tranquil afternoon. She grabbed the iron bars of the gate, rattling them violently. "Do you know who I am? I paid for this. You are ruining my niece's wedding. Brittany, tell them we own this date." Patricia turned to her right, expecting Brittany to unleash a torrent of entitled fury alongside her. She expected her golden child to perform the role she had been assigned. But Brittany did not yell. She did not defend her aunt. Brittany stood perfectly still, looking at the wrought iron gate, then at the frantic, screaming woman beside her. She looked back at Kevin, who was gesturing aggressively from the parking lot, demanding she fix the situation. She saw the cage, the iron bars Patricia had built around her life, and she saw the open sky beyond them. Brittany reached up to the crown of her head. Her fingers found the heavy metal comb securing the gaudy, cathedral-length veil. With a swift, decisive pull, she yanked the comb free. The heavy tool collapsed, pooling in the Idaho dust around her pristine white heels. "What are you doing?" Patricia gasped, her eyes wide with horror as she watched the expensive fabric hit the dirt. Brittany took a deep breath. Her shoulders, previously hunched under the weight of Patricia's expectations, straightened. She looked her aunt directly in the eye, the fear finally eclipsed by a cold, searing clarity. "I am not the bride, Patricia," Brittany said, her voice carrying a calm, unyielding strength that stunned the courtyard into silence. "She is." Brittany pointed a single, steady finger up toward the second-story window. Patricia's head whipped around. Her eyes followed Brittany's gesture, traveling up the stone facade of the estate until they locked onto mine. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, framed by the window, looking down at the woman who had spent 28 years trying to make me invisible. I met her gaze, letting her see the full, unvarnished reality of her defeat. I was not the sacrificial angel. I was the architect of her ruin. "No," Patricia whispered, the word barely escaping her lips as the realization hit her. "You did not. You could not have." "I do not want this wedding," Brittany said, turning her attention to the growing crowd. Her voice was louder now, addressing the audience Patricia had gathered. "I do not want this dress. I do not want to marry Kevin. My aunt forged a contract to steal her own daughter's venue, and she used me as the excuse. I am done playing the prop." Kevin lunged forward from the crowd, his face purple with rage. "Brittany, get back here right now. Stop making a scene and handle these guards." Brittany looked at the man she had been terrified of for a year. She looked at his clenched fists and his demanding glare. Then she turned her back on him. She walked toward the corporate security director. "I'm on the guest list," she stated. "My name is Brittany." The director tapped his tablet, offering a polite nod. "Yes, ma'am, you are cleared for entry." The two guards stepped aside, creating a narrow gap. Brittany stepped through the iron gates, leaving the heavy, dusty veil and her furious fiancé behind in the gravel. She did not look back at Patricia. She walked across the courtyard and disappeared into the venue. Patricia stood alone at the gate, the matriarch without a throne, the puppet master whose strings had just been publicly severed. "Let me in," Patricia screamed, throwing her weight against the iron bars, her composure entirely destroyed. She pounded her fists against the metal. "You cannot do this to me. I am her mother. I demand to be let inside." "Ma'am," the director said, stepping forward, signaling the guards to flank him. "You are trespassing on private property. If you do not leave the premises immediately, you will be arrested." Patricia looked at the impassive guards. She looked back at the crowd of 80 elite guests, the political family she had desperately tried to impress, the aunts and uncles she had manipulated. They were staring at her, the whispers growing louder, the judgment palpable. She had gathered them here to witness a triumph, and instead, they were witnessing the total collapse of her carefully curated empire. I watched her stumble backward, her hands shaking, her perfect navy pantsuit suddenly looking absurdly out of place. She had built a glass house, and we had just shattered every single pane. But the trap was not entirely finished. Patricia's humiliation at the gate was the physical barrier. It kept her out of my sanctuary. But she still had an audience. She still had the capacity to spin a narrative, to claim I was a vindictive daughter who had maliciously stolen the venue back at the last minute. She could still try to salvage her reputation among the confused guests standing in the parking lot. I turned away from the window, my heart steady, my mind sharply focused on the final phase of the operation. Taylor was waiting by the door of the bridal suite, a tablet in her hand. "The perimeter is secure," she confirmed. "The decoy guests are contained in the parking area." "Are the main reception hall screens powered on?" I asked, checking my reflection in the mirror one last time. "They are active and waiting for your command," Taylor replied, a fierce, triumphant smile spreading across her face. I walked toward the door, the heavy lace of my gown sweeping the floor. It was time to deploy the design weapon. It was time to ensure that my mother's false narrative was not just challenged, but permanently, undeniably obliterated. I turned away from the window, the image of Patricia pounding her fists against the wrought iron gates burning into my memory. Her humiliation at the perimeter was a necessary victory, but it was incomplete. A physical barrier could keep her out of my sanctuary, but it could not dismantle the fortress of lies she had constructed within the minds of our extended family. She still had an audience waiting in the parking lot, and unless I severed her narrative at the root, she would spin this rejection into another tale of her own victimization. I needed to deploy the final weapon. Taylor stood by the door of the bridal suite, her fingers hovering over the glowing screen of her tablet. "The perimeter is holding," she confirmed, her voice low and steady. "But several of your mother's guests managed to bypass the initial checkpoint before the security shift. They are currently mingling in the main reception hall." "Who made it inside?" I asked, smoothing the heavy lace of my gown. Taylor tapped the screen. "Aunt Carol, Uncle David, Cousin Maria, and a handful of Patricia's country club friends, the core of her echo chamber." "Perfect," I whispered, a cold, strategic thrill coursing through my veins. "Are the reception hall LED screens powered on and displaying the stolen files?" "They are active," Taylor replied, a fierce, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "They are currently looping the static floral motif Brittany downloaded from your cloud account last month." I took a deep breath, feeling the culmination of weeks of silent planning coalesce into this single moment. "Execute the override, Taylor." Taylor tapped a command on her tablet. Downstairs in the cavernous, dimly lit main reception hall of the Coeur d'Alene estate, the atmosphere was thick with confusion and forced politeness. Aunt Carol and Uncle David stood near the polished mahogany bar, sipping champagne, entirely unaware of the chaos unfolding at the front gates. They were admiring the massive floor-to-ceiling LED screens that anchored the room, displaying the intricate sage and blush native Idaho wildflowers I had painstakingly designed. Suddenly, the vibrant floral patterns flickered. A sharp digital distortion ripped across the high-resolution screens. The delicate syringa and fireweed blossoms fractured into static, the muted colors bleeding out until the displays went entirely black. The low hum of conversation in the room sputtered and died. Aunt Carol lowered her champagne flute, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then the screens flared back to life, but they no longer displayed the elegant botanical motif. Instead, a series of giant, stark, undeniable images materialized across the massive displays, towering over the guests in high contrast, black and white. The first image was a high-resolution scan of the Summit Hospitality Ledger Transfer Authorization. It dominated the center screen, highlighting the forged signature at the bottom. Beside it, in glaring red text, was the email Sarah had sent confirming the unauthorized maneuver. "Per Patricia's instructions, we have successfully moved your booking and the primary deposit over to Brittany's name." Gasps rippled through the small crowd of toxic relatives. Uncle David took a step closer to the screens, his eyes squinting behind his glasses as he processed the undeniable evidence of fraud. Before anyone could speak, the image shifted. The screens flashed to a blown-up screenshot of the bank statement showing the $5,000 withdrawal from my account, juxtaposed next to a receipt proving Patricia had used those stolen funds to secure the $10,000 premium upgrade. The financial sabotage was laid bare, exposing the reality that Patricia had not made a grand sacrifice, but had actively bankrupted her own daughter to fund her illusion. But the final blow was auditory. The venue's surround sound system, previously playing a soft, ambient classical loop, suddenly crackled. A voice filled the reception hall, echoing off the high ceilings and polished floors. It was not my voice. It was Patricia's. It was the chilling, late-night voicemail she had left me weeks ago, transcribed in massive text across the screens, while the audio played in pristine clarity. Chloe, Patricia's recorded voice, purred, dripping with venom and condescension. "I hear you have been upsetting the vendors. If you try to ruin your cousin's special day by causing drama, I will personally ensure that not a single member of our family attends whatever little ceremony you manage to scrape together. Grandma will not be there. Your uncles will not be there. You will walk down the aisle alone." The absolute silence that followed the recording was deafening. It was the sound of a carefully curated, decade-long narrative shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Aunt Carol stood frozen, her champagne flute slipping from her grasp and shattering against the hardwood floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass broke the spell. Cousin Maria covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horrified realization. They had spent weeks praising Patricia as a selfless matriarch, attacking me as an ungrateful, jealous bride. Now, standing beneath the towering evidence of her extortion, forgery, and psychological abuse, the truth was inescapable. I had used my art, the very career Patricia constantly belittled, to completely obliterate her false reality. There was nowhere left for the family to hide. The digital Trojan horse had detonated, and the blast radius encompassed every lie she had ever told. Upstairs in the bridal suite, I listened to the faint echo of the audio playing through the floorboards. I did not feel a triumphant surge of vindication. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. I had severed the invisible strings. Taylor looked up from her tablet, her eyes shining with fierce pride. The payload was delivered successfully. The guests in the hall are currently being escorted out by security to join the rest of the uninvited crowd in the parking lot. I nodded, smoothing the front of my gown. The infection had been excised. My sanctuary was finally clean. I walked out of the bridal suite and moved toward the grand staircase. The heavy oak banister felt solid and grounding beneath my hand. As I descended into the foyer, the chaos of the eviction was wrapping up. Security was systematically clearing the last of Patricia's network out the front doors, securing the perimeter for the true celebration to begin. But as I reached the bottom step, the heavy mahogany doors swung open one last time. It was not a security guard returning. It was not a straggling, confused aunt. It was Grandma Lopez. She walked into the foyer, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane I had never seen her use before. She wore a tailored black dress, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She did not look like a woman playing the role of a frail, dying grandmother anymore. She looked like a judge arriving to deliver a final verdict, and standing directly behind her, looking utterly destroyed and exhausted, was Patricia. My mother had somehow bypassed the outer perimeter and followed my grandmother inside. Patricia's pristine navy suit was covered in dust from her struggle at the gate. Her makeup was smeared, her hair wild and unkempt. She looked like a woman who had just survived a shipwreck, only to realize the island she washed up on was occupied by hostile forces. "Chloe," Patricia choked out, her voice a ragged, desperate rasp. "Please, you have to stop this. You are humiliating me in front of everyone. Kevin's family is out there." I stopped at the base of the stairs, looking at the woman who had spent 28 years trying to make me shrink. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. "I did not humiliate you, Patricia," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet foyer. "You humiliated yourself. I just provided the projector." Patricia took a step forward, reaching out a trembling hand. "But I am your mother. You cannot do this to your own family." Before I could respond, Grandma Lopez stepped between us. The matriarch slammed the tip of her silver cane against the marble floor. The sharp, cracking sound echoed like a gunshot, demanding absolute silence. Patricia froze, her eyes darting to the older woman, expecting the frail, dying victim she had spent weeks exploiting. Grandma Lopez straightened her spine, discarding the illusion of weakness entirely. She looked at Patricia with a gaze so cold it could have frozen Lake Coeur d'Alene. The final judgment was about to be delivered, and it would ensure that Patricia's exile from our family was absolute and permanent. Grandma Lopez stood tall in the grand foyer, the silver tip of her cane resting firmly against the polished marble floor. Patricia stared at her own mother-in-law, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto dry land. The frail, coughing woman Patricia had visited just days prior was gone. In her place stood the true matriarch of the Lopez family, radiating a cold, unyielding authority. "Florence," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling as her eyes darted around the room, "you should not be out of bed. Your heart condition." "My heart beats with perfect rhythm, Patricia," Grandma stated, her tone devoid of any maternal warmth. "It has been beating perfectly fine for 82 years. Long enough to watch you attempt to destroy my family from the inside out." Patricia took a stumbling step backward. Her gaze darted to me, then back to the older woman. "You knew. You plotted against me." "I survived you," Grandma corrected sharply, "just like Clara survived you 20 years ago. You thought you could use my imagined death as a shield for your own greed. You sat by my chair, offered me lukewarm soup, and asked if I would alter my will to cover your fraudulent venue premium." Patricia's face drained of the last remaining color. She looked around the cavernous foyer, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, an escape route. The security guard stood impassively by the heavy mahogany doors. Nolan had moved to stand beside me, his presence a silent, steadfast barrier. "I was trying to help Brittany," Patricia pleaded, the lie sounding thin and pathetic even to her own ears. "Brittany left you at the gate," Grandma replied, delivering the truth with surgical precision, "because she finally saw the cage you built for her. You do not love your daughters, Patricia. You love the reflection they cast on you, but the mirror is broken." Grandma lifted her cane and pointed it directly at Patricia's chest. "You wanted to discuss my will? Let us discuss it now. As the executor of the Lopez Family Trust, I am formally severing your access. You are removed from the inheritance. You are removed from the estate. You will no longer attend our holiday gatherings. You have spent decades treating this family like a currency you could spend to buy social status. Today, your accounts are empty." The finality of the words echoed off the high ceilings. It was a biblical exile, delivered without a single raised voice. Patricia had built her entire identity around her financial standing and her pristine reputation. Grandma Lopez had just incinerated both. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to scream, to deploy one last desperate tactic, but there was no ammunition left. The security director stepped forward, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. He guided her toward the exit. She did not resist. Her shoulders slumped, her pristine navy suit covered in the dust from the gravel driveway. She looked like a ghost being swept out of the house. The doors clicked shut behind her, sealing the exit. The silence that washed over the foyer was clean. The air felt lighter, as if a suffocating pressure system had finally moved past the mountains. I looked at Nolan. He reached out and intertwined his fingers with mine. His grip was warm and grounding. "Are we ready to get married?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine and fresh water drifting through the open terrace doors. I have never been more ready. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the authentic celebration began. The string quartet, a local group Nolan had hired months ago, began to play a delicate acoustic arrangement. The music drifted across the manicured lawn, carrying over the sparkling blue expanse of Lake Coeur d'Alene. I did not have a sprawling bridal party. I did not have an aisle lined with 80 strangers judging my choices. I walked down the stone path, escorted by Grandma Lopez, her steps slow but steady, her arm linked securely through mine. The wooden chairs facing the arbor were filled with the 130 people who mattered. Susan and Richard sat in the front row. Richard offered a brief, approving nod as I passed. In the second row, wearing a simple blue dress she had borrowed from Taylor, sat Brittany. She was smiling, her eyes bright and free of the heavy, bruised exhaustion that had haunted her for a year. I reached the arbor. Marie had executed the floral design flawlessly. Asymmetrical branches of wild fireweed and delicate white syringa framed the altar, looking untamed and resilient against the structured wooden beams. Nolan took my hands. His eyes were shining, reflecting the bright Idaho sky. Our vows were not long, but they were forged in the fire of the past month. We did not just promise to love each other in good times. We promised to protect each other from the bad, to stand as a united front against any force that tried to diminish our light. When he kissed me, the crowd erupted into genuine, unscripted applause. The reception was a masterclass in joy. There were no forced smiles, no political networking, no whispering aunts scrutinizing the centerpieces. Marcus delivered the smoked brisket, the rich, savory scent filling the evening air. The wine flowed freely. As the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the foothills, painting the sky in vibrant shades of violet and gold, the fairy lights strung above the terrace flickered to life. The glowing bulbs cast a warm, golden canopy over the dance floor. Nolan led me to the center of the terrace for our first dance. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. We moved together under the lights, surrounded by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I closed my eyes, searching myself for the lingering remnants of the war. I expected to find a knot of residual anger, a phantom echo of the betrayal. Instead, I found nothing but an expansive, soaring freedom. The heavy armor I had worn for 28 years, the constant vigilance required to navigate my mother's impossible expectations, had fallen away. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the erased daughter. I was simply Chloe. 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind rattled the windows of our home in Boise. I stood in the center of the spare bedroom, surrounded by cardboard boxes. We were finally organizing the last of the wedding gifts and clearing out old storage. I held a familiar wooden frame in my hands. It housed the faded, grainy photograph of Brittany and me in our matching Easter dresses, the very picture Patricia had weaponized on Facebook to launch her campaign of deception. I stared at the 7-year-old version of myself, looking warily at the girl reaching for my plastic tiara. I felt a profound wave of tenderness for that little girl. She had survived long enough to learn how to fight back. I wrapped the frame in a thick layer of bubble wrap, securing the plastic with a strip of packing tape. I placed it at the very bottom of a sturdy cardboard box, stacking old college textbooks and winter sweaters on top of it, burying the image under the weight of my actual life. I sealed the box, picked a thick black marker, and wrote "attic storage" across the flap. Nolan appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He looked at the sealed box, then at me, a silent question in his eyes. I took a mug from his hand, the ceramic warming my palms. I offered him a calm, untroubled smile. For decades, I believed that setting a boundary meant building a fortress. I thought protecting myself meant hiding behind thick walls, bracing for the inevitable siege. But watching my mother drive away from the iron gates of my wedding taught me the true architecture of peace. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. They define the shape of your house, and they determine who is granted the privilege of stepping inside. I turned off the light in the spare bedroom, leaving the sealed box in the shadows. I walked down the hallway with my husband, stepping into the bright, sunlit kitchen we had built together. The door to the past was locked, and for the rest of my life, I was the only one holding the key. We all know the picture-perfect American family. We see them on our social media feeds, smiling on manicured suburban lawns, wearing matching sweaters and holiday cards, projecting an image of effortless, unconditional love. But what happens when that carefully curated image becomes more important than the actual human beings forced to pose for it? The story of Chloe, Patricia, and Brittany is far more than a simple saga of a hijacked wedding date and corporate revenge. It is a stark, unflinching mirror held up to modern family dynamics. It pulls back the curtain on the quiet battles fought in our own living rooms, revealing the deep cracks that can form in the foundation of traditional parenting when appearances eclipse authenticity. In the competitive social landscapes of suburban America, children are too often reduced to milestones and social currency. Patricia did not just plan a wedding. She orchestrated a theatrical production designed entirely to elevate her own status, using her daughter and niece as mere props to impress influential families. This is the tragic, fatal flaw of transactional parenting. When a parent views a child's achievements, their career, their marriage, their life choices, as a personal reflection of their own success, the child ceases to be an individual. The message to parents is as urgent as it is clear. Your children's milestones are not your social currency. Forcing a child into a pre-written narrative, whether it is the role of the sacrificial angel or the perfect bride, does not foster love or respect. It breeds a deep-seated, generational resentment that eventually tears the family structure apart. This brings us to the dangerous, dual-edged illusion of the golden child and the scapegoat dynamic. In many families struggling with emotional awareness, children are unconsciously assigned these roles. We watch the story and immediately recognize Chloe's pain as the scapegoat, the daughter pushed aside, deemed difficult or ungrateful, simply for daring to possess her own mind. But the narrative offers a profound revelation. Brittany, the supposed golden child, was just as trapped. She was suffocating inside a golden cage, forced toward a marriage with a controlling, abusive man simply because her aunt valued a political pedigree over a young woman's physical and emotional safety. It is a chilling reminder for any parent that favoritism is not a form of love. It is a mechanism of control. It is a poison that harms every child involved, paralyzing the favored child with impossible expectations while starving the neglected child of basic validation. Traditional family structures in American culture are built on the bedrock of loyalty, respect, and the age-old mandate to honor thy father and mother. Yet Chloe's journey asks a painful but necessary question. What happens when loyalty is demanded in service of a lie? Patricia weaponized tradition, going so far as to fabricate a terminal illness for Grandma Lopez to emotionally checkmate her daughter into submission. Emotional blackmail is an insidious abuse that masquerades as familial duty. Authentic family education cannot exist where guilt is the primary tool of instruction. It must be built on honesty, fairness, and a profound emotional awareness of a child's inner life. A family that demands loyalty to a deception is a house fundamentally unsound, destined to collapse under its own weight. Contrast this toxic manipulation with the role of Grandma Lopez. In many families, elders are expected to keep the peace at all costs, sweeping abuse under the rug to maintain the illusion of a happy, unified home. But Grandma Lopez represents the healthy, vital side of tradition. She did not side with Patricia blindly out of familial obligation. She stood as an anchor of justice because Chloe held the truth. She teaches us that true tradition protects the vulnerable. It does not feed them to the wolves to save face at the country club. The role of the elder in family education should be to serve as a safe harbor of wisdom and equity, a force that interrupts generational trauma rather than enabling it. For young adults stepping into their own lives and navigating these treacherous waters, this narrative is a masterclass in survival and reclamation. It teaches us that you do not have to be a silent victim to someone else's loud lie. Patricia attempted to steal the narrative by posting falsehoods on social media, banking on the idea that Chloe would stay quiet to keep the peace. But Chloe's success came when she stopped shrinking to fit her mother's comfort zone and used the truth to detonate the illusions. Furthermore, when Richard, Chloe's formidable father-in-law, hands her the reins instead of fighting her battle for her, he imparts a lesson that every young person must eventually learn. Power is only valuable in the hands of someone with the courage to hold it. No one is going to rescue you from a toxic dynamic if you are not willing to strike the match yourself. Whether you use your professional expertise, your digital architecture, your financial independence, or simply your steadfast refusal to stay quiet, your unique skills are the arsenal you must use to protect your future. You must become the architect of your own life. And then comes the most beautiful, liberating revelation of all. We are so often taught that setting boundaries with family is an act of war, a cold and callous building of barricades. But as Chloe stands in her sunlit kitchen, packing away the remnants of her past, she realizes that boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They define the shape of your home, and they determine who has the earned privilege of walking into your space. Setting a boundary against a toxic parent isn't an act of cruelty. It is the fundamental act of reclaiming your own soul. If you have ever found yourself standing at the threshold of your own life, holding the door shut against a storm of familial expectations, you are not alone. These stories exist because these quiet struggles are universal, happening in homes all across the country. To hear more tales of people reclaiming their power, breaking toxic cycles, and rewriting their own narratives, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow the Savage Revenge Stories channel. We explore the darkest corners of family drama to help uncover the brightest sparks of human resilience. Ultimately, the cycle of generational trauma only ends when someone is brave enough to pack it up in a box and leave it in the attic. We can choose to step out of the shadows of our parents' past mistakes and build something genuine. But as we reflect on Chloe's journey, we are forced to look down at our own hands. Are we holding the tools to build a genuine, honest life? Or are we just rearranging the props on someone else's stage? We all hold a key to the life we are meant to live. The question that remains, echoing quietly in the back of our minds long after the story ends, is simply this: which doors will you finally choose to lock forever? And which ones will you find the courage to open?